Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good Saturday morning. Thank you all for getting up, getting your coffee, and getting organized to join us. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Education, Saturday, January 9th, 2021. The next regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Ed will be Tuesday, January 12th, 7:30 in this room. Thank you. This is the kickoff to our 2021-2022 budget season. We had our opening night on Thursday, and thank you for all those that participated in that. Many people have participated in this before. Those that have not, the agenda goes through each RC. After we get a review of each RC, we open it up to board comment. The fact that we have a long agenda and a long day and a lot of good discussion, I'm sure, we're going to try and keep it a little organized. So after board comment, we will look for comment from our other partners in town on RTM Finance, RTM Education, CDSP, and CPAC. So we'll look for those folks and those questions and then open it up to general comment and questions from the rest of the folks online. So thank you. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Adley for the ongoing discussion of the proposed 2021-22 budget.
Good morning, everyone. This is on, first of all.
Yeah, could I interrupt you for a second? I know many people have said there's a challenge with hearing people speak with the masks on. We want to do the right thing and keep our masks on. So the code is, if you can't hear, thumbs up, and we'll make sure whoever's speaking speaks louder and clearer into the microphone. Please don't hesitate to interrupt. It's important everyone hears us. It's important we hear everyone. So just speak loudly and as clear as possible through our masks. Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Adley.
Quite okay. I just want to make sure that this is actually on. Can everybody hear me? Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time this morning, both our board members and also members of the community, to get up and spend your Saturday with us, actually celebrating what we have done in the past and also looking forward to the future for our planning. So we will follow the regular schedule. Participants are remote, including principals and department heads and town officials and parents. So with that, Mr. Nadeem, Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to lead off with our Darien High School. And Ellen Dunn is ready, has her cup of coffee, no doubt.
Right here.
To the high school.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to start by thanking the Board of Education, certainly our wonderful parent community, and our Darien town community for supporting the work of Darien High School. We are so grateful as an administration and a faculty for the privilege of working with an extraordinary group of students. We're especially proud this year of their accomplishments in the face of overwhelming obstacles. Their generosity of spirit, their kindness, and their pride in their school community, even though it's certainly not exactly the same as it has been or will be in the future, is something that we all appreciate. We are looking forward to having full classrooms and full hallways, full of their laughter and excitement for learning. All that we do as educators is ultimately about them. And I think you'll hear that all day long as we go through the budget process. It's about their growth, their well-being, and their readiness to take the next steps with confidence in a strong academic foundation and who they are as people. Independent, resilient, certainly they have proven that, and curious for more, ready to take on the passions that they want to follow after leaving high school. So these budget allocations allow us to continue to provide an excellent education at Darien High School, and I want to start by thanking you for that. So the first place we always look when beginning the budget process is at the projected enrollment for the high school. And we have an increase next year. We predict of 62 students at the high school. When we break that out it is an increase of about 26 students in the 9th grade, a decrease of 22 in the 11th grade, a small increase of 3 in 10th grade, and a larger change of 55 students increasing in the 12th grade. So overall, when you think about that increase, and we look at our teacher resource, which is of course our most precious resource in the building, we expect that over most disciplines, that would cause an increase of 3 sections if we keep to our expected class size of between 18 and 22 students. So you heard Dr. Adley the other night talk about looking at the FTE that we use currently in the building before we make a recommendation for an increase in FTE. And one of the areas that we've discussed is our team teaching model as an area where we may not be using our FTE as efficiently as we would like to be. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background to the board because I think some of you may not be familiar with some of the support models, but in 2016-17 school year, we closed what were formerly called 200 level classes at Darien High School. And we did that for many reasons, but primarily because we felt that many of our students in the 200 level with the proper support could reach the expectations of our 300 level courses. And so in order to do that, we put into place 2 general ed supports. One that we call the lab supported model, and the second that we call the team taught model. So in our lab supported model, students meet with their classroom teacher, typically 3 times a rotation outside of the class period. And there is an opportunity for pre-teaching, post-teaching, and a fairly intensive level of support for those students in order for them to be successful within that 300 curriculum, in order for them to feel confident in preparation for the classes that are coming up, to review materials that they may have missed in the bigger class setting. And it has proven to be a very successful model for our students. Our teachers, I think, agree that it's a very, very important model in terms of supporting our students. The team teaching model is a less intense model in terms of intervention on a one-to-one basis, where 2 general ed teachers are in the classroom supporting students in that classroom. And the real benefit of that model is the reduction of student to teacher ratio. So with 2 students in a classroom of 2 teachers in a classroom of 22 students, you obviously have an opportunity for teachers to work closely with students with that lower ratio. And there have been benefits to that model as well, for sure. And however, when we look at that model, what we've seen is over time, a preference for the lab support because it is more of an intervention. And there has been a reduction in the number of requests for team teaching over time from that first year to today. The major problem that we're having now with the team model is the scheduling of that model. And so when there are a lower number of sections of any course, they begin to act like singletons in the schedule. And so it has become increasingly problematic to get the right students into the team teaching environment. And that has really caused a less than effective use of our teacher resource. As a result, students have to make choices sometimes. They may be looking to have the support that the team teaching model provides. However, it might block them from other things that they need to have, or it might eliminate an important elective for them and so forth. And so this difficulty in scheduling is really the primary reason that I think we should be looking at this FTE and applying it in different ways, making sure that we are maintaining the class size that we'd like across the whole school, that we all agree upon every year when we talk about class sizes. So the concept is to reallocate some of that FTE to open other sections of classes and maintain a very healthy student to teacher ratio in our building across all areas. As I said, the overall projected increase of 62 would mean 3 sections in most of our disciplines. And if we take a look at how those sections break out, the review of class sizes lead us to make recommendations for an increase in 3 sections of English, which is a 0.6, 3 sections in world language, which is a 0.6 as well, 4 sections in math. And the reason for that difference is that the math class numbers are very high at the moment. And so we wanted to make sure that we reduce and get the class sizes down to a better average in the math department. And a 0.6 in computer science and tech ed. So if you look on the budget page in the personnel section, just to try to clarify for you, when you see on computer teachers an increase of 0.6, the English teachers, there's a decrease of 0.2, and that comes from the exchange of 0.8 decrease for the team taught sections, and then a corresponding increase for enrollment of 0.6 to net us out at a negative 0.2 there. The world language teachers, an increase of 0.6, the math teachers, an increase in 0.8, and the social studies teachers, a decrease in 0.8 due to the 4 sections of team taught there. You'll also see a movement from curriculum supervision and the library staff. There's a 0.2 exchange from that leadership down to the library staff. That is being, those responsibilities are being moved over to Joan McGettigan. And there is a reduction of 1 paraprofessional in the library at the high school who will be moving to the middle school. So if you take that in summary, in order to meet the enrollment at the high school, reusing some of the FTE that we had dedicated in this year's budget to the team teaching, we'd have an overall increase at DHS of a 1.0 requested in our budget. I'd like to take a moment just to talk about the computer science and tech ed piece of that. We expect that we would hope with the approval of this budget to hire a 1.0 computer science teacher as a benefit to this increase in computer science and tech ed. The current computer science teacher assignment is at 0.4, and this would allow us to assign all of the computer science courses to one person with that expertise in the discipline, while also freeing up some of the tech ed teachers who are currently teaching some of the computer science courses to pursue some of our STEM courses. We will see an increase in STEM for sure, not only due to the enrollment increase that is being experienced everywhere, but also because we have increased, as you remember, the STEM requirements for graduation. Our current sophomores need to meet 9 STEM credits before graduation. So just to give you some perspective on that, we took a look at the percentage of students in the class of 2020 and their STEM credits. And so almost 32% of the students who graduated in 2020 did not have 9 STEM credits. They were very close. 26% of those 32% had 8 or more. But clearly there will be students who will be taking more STEM in the next 2 years. And we want to make sure that we have the capacity to offer those courses and that we've given some exciting options for our students in STEM as well. So we will be later in the month introducing some new courses to support that as well. And we'll be bringing those forward to you, I believe, at the end of the month. And just to give you a little preview, we have STEM Innovation and Design, which will be a collaboration between the Science Department and the Tech Ed Department. There'll be a proposal for an app development course, a new app development course for our students, and an accounting course, and then some other changes to current courses that I think will be exciting options for our students. So it's an exciting time for me. You know, I'm a little bit biased in the STEM. I see I have some history teachers on here who are smiling, but it'll be an exciting time for us to bring some new STEM courses to our students, along with some other courses that will be coming forward as well in January. So other notable changes in the operating portion of the high school budget, important to note an significant increase in the textbook replacement account of $12,400. That's due to some world language and English texts that are coming up for renewal. When we've gone to the online courses in some areas, those renewals are usually required after 6 or 7 years. And so we have textbooks that are up for that renewal this year. The other change in other student activities, 10-2003, sadly is a reduction for the China exchange hosting. Given the circumstances that we're in, we don't expect that the China exchange will be able to take place next year, but certainly, like so many other things, we are hoping to see that return in future years. Very important program for our students and our school. And lastly, back to the science theme, 12/31/4, we have some new science equipment, around $5,000 requested there for additional lab probes to work in the biology classrooms and chemistry classrooms, and PCR and electrophoresis package for biology. Certainly timely. We're hearing a lot of discussion in our lives about PCR, for sure, polymerase chain reactions in our daily lives when it comes to our COVID testing. So elsewhere in the budget, I'd just like to mention, even though it doesn't appear in RCO1, certainly I appreciate, and the school appreciates, the support for an ever-evolving curriculum writing program and the support that you give us under other RCs for that work. Our teachers value that, value the time to work with one another and develop curriculum for new courses, and as well as revising curriculum for current courses. Certainly professional development is essential. This has been a time when that has been very difficult. I am absolutely sure that as soon as our doors open and we're able to be together more and work together more closely and travel more easily, our teachers will be very anxious to be exposed to professional opportunities outside of the school system. Also, of course, our tech initiative, appreciate the investment that the board has made. Certainly the technology has proven to be an essential part of what we do every day. And also in the facilities budget, there is a renovation to the TV studio, which I think will be an exciting opportunity for our students to dive further into media studies. So I appreciate all of those parts of the budget as well. And I think that covers my comments, and I'm happy to entertain any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dunn. I'll kick it off. This kind of maybe cuts across all ERCs, but just Dr. Adley, Mrs. Dunn, $34,000 in upgraded or book replacements. I'm assuming we've invested in all this technology. Can any of these hardback books go to technology and be online and be digital? And I'm sure that's looked at, but these are the needs based on looking at the potential of putting these books online.
I won't speak for everyone else, but I think, there are some departments and some programs and courses for which the online textbooks, I think, are more appropriate. And there are some for which the textbook itself is a choice. The renewal, the replacement of textbook happens every year as they get older and can't be a rebound, for example. If you were to reinvest in all of those books online, the number there would be fairly enormous, So I think over time, to answer your question, Mr. Dean, we will probably convert more and more to the online, but you will see the renewal cost again every time those 6 or 7 years go by. So it may bear a district look, but
No, I appreciate that, and I'm sure there's licensing costs about putting X amount of books online, so thank you. I'll open it up for board questions and comments. Mr. Sini?
On line 21302, substitute teachers, maybe could somebody just remind me what, there was a big variation in the 19 and 20 line item relative to the 2018, 2019 line item. Maybe just, and then we go back in the budget in 2020 to 2021 to 88,500, and then we're budgeting for next year a lower number. So maybe if somebody could walk me through the variation.
I think it's a good opportunity for maybe Rich to talk about building substitutes versus substitute training.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Sorry, that's what I was looking for.
So the 1920 number is lower because we work
Hey,
close.
Rich, could you just make sure you've got that microphone right up to you? Thank you so much.
So the 1920 number is obviously lower because we were closed for 3 months of the year. So we had really no substitute expenditures for March through June. Within the substitute accounts historically, we've kind of lumped together building subs and daily subs. So for the current fiscal year and then the budget that you're looking at, we did carve those two out. So a building sub is somebody who's there 4 days a week. They're really the first person to cover a course outside of an intern. The daily sub are kind of like constant, like different people every day, depending on need of the subject matter. The difference is a building sub is paid $125 a day for those 4 days a week that they're here, and then the daily sub is $100 a day. So we did kind of aggregate the budget so that you could see the difference between a building sub and then a daily sub.
And
Deb,
I just have more questions on the
Deb,
building. so
let me
it's
go.
okay, sorry.
All right,
I don't wanna go off the
everyone raise their hand and I'll go around the room, all right?
so,
Mr. Sini?
so just as a follow-up, so it's going to be a separate line item that's called out.
It is a separate line item. You'll see the account code for building subs 21318. It's a few lines lower than the substitute account. The aggregate of the two is largely in line with what you would have seen in past years, with the exception of last year due to the shutdown.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mrs. Ritchie?
Want to stay on this topic. I guess, could you guys talk a little bit about, and I understand the rationale, but a little bit about the difference I'm
Deb, just
seeing.
the microphone again. I
Sorry.
know everyone's looking at their book and turning their heads.
It's
so-
hard.
yeah,
So
thank you.
just the rationale in each of the buildings, and I know right now we're on DHS, and I'm seeing that there's a difference in the allocation between building subs and subs. So could you maybe speak to DHS and why it is the way it's structured the way it is? Thank you.
So I'll answer a little bit, Marge can chime in. So we do have a tendency to see a lot of turnover in building subs, especially at the elementary level. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see the lower amount at the elementary level as opposed to the secondary level at the high school and middle school. At the elementary level, they tend to stay for, maybe 80 to 90 days, and then they kind of turn over. At the secondary level, they are there a little bit longer, so you will see that amount in the building sub higher. That's really kind of the difference between the two.
One of
one of the nice things about building subs is that we require them to be certified teachers, so that a lot of times when they move into a long-term sub position, not as much at the high school because of the individual certifications, but they're a big help to the principals when somebody goes out on leave at the elementary level.
Thank you.
It's also tremendously helpful organizationally when you know that you've got a small cadre that you can plan in advance with.
Mhm. Yeah, makes
Thank you.
sense. Mrs. Ackman,
Can we get back to team teachers? Can you hear me?
it doesn't seem like it's even on, is it? Yeah.
It is on.
It's on.
It's closer.
I need to know more about team teachers because I think there's a real concern here. Mrs. Dunn, what I'm hearing at the moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to make sure I have notes, is that it's really partially a scheduling issue, and which has a little bit of concern for me because if there's kids that want to be in this class and yet we're taking out the team model, I need to understand kind of that more, what the scheduling issue is. And I do have a part of this that I think if we're worried or if we are at least aware that all kids coming back into the building are going to maybe need more supports. In the past, if children needed this, I would think we would see more children possibly needing to access kind of smaller one-on-one student-teacher ratios to kind of help them navigate back being in full in person. So I just need to hear a little bit more. This is a big switch for the board.
Okay. Ellen, if you want to speak first or not, I can go first or second, doesn't matter.
I'm happy to speak first, and then you can follow up with. I understand that, and I appreciate what that there may be a greater need. You're absolutely right. There are things that we don't know about next year. I do, the reason that there's a scheduling problem is really because of the decrease in requests. When faced with choices of supports, families and students have more often selected the lab as a more effective model. That doesn't mean that the team teaching is an ineffective model, I guess is what I want to make sure is clear. But since the numbers go down, it's like running an AP English, or that's a bad example, an AP French, where there's only one section and there are 10 students that are taking the class. When you're scheduling that class, it meets at one time during the day, and then you're trying to match up every student who needs that with that one period. And so it does create a situation where fewer students than may have been recommended initially can actually get support. That's just a limitation of the school day. So either we have to find a different support for those students, which may be a lab model or something else, or those students have actually selected these are general ed students that, this is general ed support, and it's not part of an IEP, for example. And so they may choose that it's more important for them to select their elective rather than be in the team taught class. This is not as intensive a response, and so I know that our teachers and students would certainly object to the removal of the support of the lab model. It's been very, very successful. And I do know that there are certainly been great success with the team taught. So this is not a judgment of the model itself, but a practical response to, are we really gaining the advantage that we need to for our students if the access to it is more challenging.
So there are a lot of support services at the high school for our students, including the co-teaching, as I said, including the labs. And certainly I'll go back and forward with Ellen here in terms of because it's just not a scheduling, just a scheduling issue. We wouldn't if it's a scheduling issue, we'll have to solve a scheduling issue, right? In some capacity. I'm not contradicting Ellen, but I'm just in looking at this, I need to make sure and ensure that those students are being well served, right? And have provided the appropriate interventions. And on looking at that, we think that they can be. We didn't eliminate completely the whole model, right? Science is still in place. But by any account, the amount of interventions at our high school is tremendous. Now, you may say that that's a good thing, or it's an opportunity to perhaps do something a little bit different. It's important as we go through that we create scenarios where our children and our students continue to create independence. And by any comparison of interventions, it's a compliment to the community and both decisions that are made in the past by boards and administration and so on. But we think that the services can still be delivered, and the supports and interventions from SRBI and so on can be delivered and supported without all of these particular sections being in place for the team teaching. So it is a combination of looking at, can we still provide the support services and the needed services and the appropriate level of intervention for children? Yes, I would say the answer is absolutely yes.
Can I go ahead.
Mrs. Stein?
A bunch of follow-ups, but I guess I'll start where you're leaving off, Alan. When we put this in place, the team, I thought, was sort of a place where children in the middle would also receive support that weren't our high flyers necessarily or kids with support, but it gave them a place to get that support. I echo Tara's concern. You've talked about, sort of what's been lost with some special ed kids. Are we willing to make this change this year? Are there going to be losses for these middle students who may have lost some time, for instance, freshmen who are doing full online learning? Are they losing in content areas that we want to make sure they'll have that extra support next year? I am slightly concerned. I guess my question would be to you, Ellen, what is SRBI looking like at the high school right now? What are the numbers in the lab classes? And this, you can come back with this.
Sure.
And do we have enough room in lab classes to accommodate the kids that maybe would have been team kids, but now won't have that opportunity? We have heard that some of the lab classes are at capacity or more. I look back at your presentation from 16, 17, and we had said 5 to 7 was sort of the range, right? So if we're hitting 10 kids in a lab, that seems like too many. So I want to make sure you have the right staffing to accommodate all learners next year if there is some remediation that needs to happen. And I understand your point, a lot of support, maybe this isn't the year to touch that.
Can I
Mrs. Achman?
follow up? I guess, do we see if part of this puzzle that we're trying to solve is that we're seeing more families request the supports in a lab model? Are we increasing our labs? Because I do think that those labs, we work very hard to keep them small because it was very clear people were electing those classes because their children needed support. And if we're maxing them out and we're having more requests for them and we're taking away the team model, I worry again about those kind of kids sitting on the bubble of, well, should I be in a team model? Should I be in a lab support? And them having anywhere to go. So I guess maybe that's a good way to hear, how is SRBI working? What at the high school, where would in the absence of a team model, where would those kids who are looking for support get it? Understanding that I think especially our history and our English, all of our teachers, but if our history and English teachers next year are welcoming back these students, where are the supports for both those teachers and students to kind of get them back and ready? Because as we all know, high school goes real quick.
Mrs. Stein?
Sorry, I had a separate clarification. Is the American Studies class, we're not talking about that with the, getting rid of team, right? Well, it was called, you used to
No,
call it-
American Studies still exists. Yeah.
Yeah, so that will still exist, right? So for
Yes.
people.
And there's lab support in that area as well.
But you'll still have the two content teacher, the history, English teaching together for 11th grade.
They partner. Yes.
Thank you. That's a great class.
Mrs. McKenna.
In the interest of time, I won't repeat a lot of what's been said, but I want to echo that I have the same questions and concerns. I want to make sure that the kids that are being served by the team model have a place, and I'd like to see what that looks like in what you're proposing. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Ritchie.
I'll echo those concerns as well, and I have other questions if people are ready to move on.
Can I just make one more
ahead.
comment? I know I requested what the SRBI supports look like, but in these classes, we also have, we often have general education students who are not identified SRBI or special education, but the teachers and or parents and teachers have talked, and there's a recognition that maybe just a little bit of extra eyes on are helpful. And so we won't capture those kids in any SRBI or special ed report. So if the next time we talk about this, someone can talk about what are we doing for those kids? Because I know whatever teacher is in front of them is going to want to offer them support, but how are we delivering that or making sure that those kids have that extra look-see, and just come in for extra help doesn't always do it. I just don't want our history and humanities teachers kind of overwhelmed without, as they welcome back our kids.
Understood.
Mrs. Ritchie.
Well, I have a lot of financial questions, so maybe Rich could just, the first question I have is on the curriculum that, I'll bring this over here. The curriculum supervision and the switch with the librarians. The add to librarians is 71,000 plus, but the takeaway from curriculum supervision is only 7,000. So could you walk me through that, reconcile that for me?
So within curriculum supervision are also the department chairs at the high school. So you're netting against the contractual increases for them as well. The librarian line item is a little bit different this year. We do have a 1-year leave in the current year, which is reflected in the revised budget. We are anticipating that person who's on leave currently this year to come back next year. It's almost like reverse turnover. So you'll see part of that 71, about $41,000 of that is that return of the 1-year leave replacement. And then you have about $20,000, which is the movement of that 0.2 release time back to the library. And then you have the contractual wage increases for the librarians at high school.
Okay, so that's where I see that transfer. That's where that sort of
Correct.
comes into play. That's what I figured. And then with all the movement among the teaching staff, I was trying to reconcile those numbers too, because some seem really high, some seem normal, but could you maybe walk through that as well with all those FTE changes?
Yep. So if we, so there's obviously the contractual increase, whatever the step and lane is for the individual teachers. Some are higher than others. If it's an individual reduction, for example, we are assuming in a master's step 10, so which is about $72,000. So if it's a 0.8, it's the 0.8 of the $72,000. If it's a 0.6, it's a 0.6 of that $72,000. And then again, if it's whether it's social studies, English, math, or language, you have to net that decrease or increase depending which way it goes against the contractual increases for the existing staff within that.
Good. Mrs. Parent.
This is a different topic, but I would like a little more clarification about the student interns and where they come from, who determines their compensation. Do other school districts in our DIRG have a similar model? It's across, it's not just DHS related, but I would like more clarification on those, please.
So many of the schools in our DIRG do have student interns. In tough budget times, people did cut them, but they're now adding them back. We tend to get the most from Sacred Heart and Fairfield University. We've reached out to Manhattanville, and they're going to try to work with us next year. They don't have an internship per se, but they're going to try to create one and work with us. We also are looking at Quinnipiac. It's a great way to find young teachers who we may want to hire. It's a great way to give back to the profession.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Mrs. Stein.
I know we pay student interns. What percentage of other districts in our DIRG pay for student interns? Do they all pay?
It's all the same. So we actually pay the university and it goes towards their tuition, but that's the setup. There are not any unpaid internships for teachers that I'm aware of in DIRG A.
Thank you.
Mrs. McKenna.
Thank you. Back on the libraries and tying a little bit to technology, I'd just like to understand, I see that we're moving a para, and that might just be a function of needing to move people around. But I know that we've been looking at the role of the library vis-a-vis its relationship to the school, its role around technology. So I'd like to understand if the para is just a movement of a person or if it represents some shift in how we're using the library. I also know that during this period of time where everyone has been remote, the libraries have been a tremendous support for tech, and then we've tried to put folks in the library to help with tech. So could you walk us through, please, the function of the library and whether or not this, or not the whole function, but whether or not this move represents anything programmatic? Anyway.
So for the librarian, we are reducing the librarians at the middle school from 2 to 1, and then this position is coming down from the high school because they don't have a paraprofessional at the middle school. So it's a supervision and organizational transfer, so to speak. And in relation to the actual middle school, which is coming up, we've done comparisons in the DERG, and so we feel we're by making that change, we can make that change comfortably. Ellen can talk about the programmatic nature at the high school. I don't believe that's going to change anything at the high school. You can certainly clarify that, Ellen.
The paraprofessional change in the high school is will impact supervision in the library for sure at the high school. And so it's not a programmatic change, but it will cut down on the interaction between adults and students within that library for sure.
Any of these changes just in general that we're making, I will say just as an old sort of like, we're not going to make them if we don't think we can work with them and make them work. That's for sure, right? Now, obviously, you could say having all certain things in place, you're always going to lose something, and there is a wee bit of a trade-off. You can't deny that. They're there for a purpose and they fulfill a good purpose. But in putting the things forward in the budget, we feel as if we can manage them.
Just
Mrs. McCammon.
may I ask a follow-up, please? I know we've used our libraries for a lot of tech support. Was this para supporting tech in any way, or do you have other folks in the library? Physically, we've used it, not necessarily.
The library media specialists do most of the work with the technology for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mrs. Richard.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to the building substitutes. You did a great breakdown for the elementary level, how many building subs we have at each of those schools. Do we have a number for DHS as well?
Two, I believe. Two.
There's 2. Okay, thank you.
Good. Any further questions on Darien High School from the board? Mrs. McCammon.
On the new STEM curriculum, do we need new materials? I did not see anything specifically. I know we haven't approved the classes, but I was just curious whether or not there are budgetary implications to this hire.
In the
Body.
Thank you. And in the curriculum budget that that Chris is putting forward, some of the curriculum writing is already included in case those courses are approved. Other than that, equipment-wise, we are able to sustain with what we have.
Thank you.
Good. Mrs. Ackman.
So, and it might be in an off-budget meeting, but it sounds like if we are writing new curriculum, it's not just a matter of resources, which is what we heard with like Project Lead the Way, that we were just getting more resources. So I would request an update to the board on STEM curriculum.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Any other further questions from the board? Michelle, we'll move on to some of our partners. I would look for any questions or comments from RTM Finance and Budget.
Good morning. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raise hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, and/or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you're unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Courtney Darby, you are unmuted and recognized.
We've got a little bit of a process we want to go through here to keep us on track. So we're going to open it up for general questions and public comment, but I'm looking for Jack Davis or anyone from his team on RTM finance and budget.
Duke, I think, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I did want to just follow up with a question on Team Tot. I know that Alan, the high school did wonderful parent and student feedback sessions when we implemented these courses, and I really think it would be so valuable if we could still do those, because it's just sounding a lot to me like this is more of a budget decision than it is like the best educational decision. And I really think that, I know I participated them at the time, and it sounded to me like from so many parents and students that they really valued that smaller student teacher ratio. So I would really encourage that. I also just think it's really important to point out that from a scheduling issue, many times the lab courses are much harder for students to schedule because they take more than one class period. So it makes it really challenging if a student needs support in more than one area, because, right, it would take up then, if you need it for English and history, that in itself would take 3 sessions. And if a student has an IEP, they would already be in learning centers. So it almost prohibits you from actually getting support in certain classes. So I would really encourage more work on this. And I really appreciate all of the board members who have raised questions, because I really think this is something that should be looked at more carefully. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, so we organize and keep ourselves on time with everything Saturday. We want to hear from everyone, but we want to have a little logic around it. My mic is on. No, it was on. Thank you. I just want to reiterate, we want to keep this a little organized so we can get through and make sure we hear everyone's questions and comments. We want to go through the folks and the partners that we work with first, and then we'll open it up to public comment and questions. So I would ask that when I ask for public comment and questions, that's when the public raises their hands after we go through board questions, RTM questions, CDSP questions, and CPAC questions, just to try and keep us a little organized. So thank you. I would ask Jack or anyone from RTM Finance and Budget, are you on?
Jack Davis? Is he part of the team, Mr.
Jack,
Denny?
I see you, but you're on mute.
Mr. Deneen, may I just make a?
Yes.
It's just if
Okay.
when you pose that question, if perhaps everybody else would take their hands off, it's the only way that Michelle will be able to manage it.
Yes, that's what the point I was trying to get
Yes.
across. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Davis.
Morning. I have 4 quick things. First, on the STEM, if the curriculum is not approved, will that be changing the budget? Number 2, I think we will want to have more discussion on the librarian switches. While we appreciate the answer now, I think we need a deeper dive on that. And just because the budget is almost 4%, we typically wouldn't go into smaller items, but I thought I would mention that if I look at 25,014 and 72,041, the historic run rate for both of those accounts seem to be much lower than what you have budgeted. After that, I think our questions are done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I'll move on to any questions from RTM Education, Clara Santori or Teresa Vogt.
Just while you do that, can I just confirm, Mr. Chambers, did you pick up those line items or Richard?
2514. What was the second? Just thank you.
Thank you.
This is Clara. Can you hear me?
Yes, Clara, thank you.
Okay, I had 2 questions. One, relating to the China program, the money, the $10,000 that's still in the budget, what will that be used for? And two, I do share the concerns about the folks who have discussed the team teaching change. I'd be interested in knowing what the impact is on the 300 level class as a whole. You said at the beginning of the presentation that you had eliminated the 200 level classes. So what's the impact of having children who have only one level of support in the lab model going to be on the 300 level classes? And also, have you asked the department heads, did they weigh in on this? And also, have you seen an increase in the number of students who are being admitted to 400 level classes? I guess because the 200 has been eliminated and there are so many more opportunities for people to be in the 300 level. So I guess overall question, has this been, has the elimination of the lab model, of the team teaching model been really thoroughly vetted? I wish you had a curriculum committee, so maybe it could be discussed there. But anyway, that's the thrust of my question.
Thank you, Clara.
Thank you.
I will move on to CDSP. Any questions from Julie or Lori?
Julie Best, you are unmuted and recognized.
Morning. Thank you so much for the chance to speak. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Real quick, I just wanted to point out how we're operating this morning, since normally we'd all be in the room. We actually have a live Google Doc going right now that's being shared with all of the PTO chairs from all the schools, as well as the CDSP reps and the CDSP special education reps. So I will operate as our mouthpiece, but I have kind of a ticker tape of input coming to me as we go through today's discussion. But very quickly, we did want to say that we echo the concerns that have been raised regarding the team teaching model. Will there be more lab supported classes added, et cetera? Look forward to more discussion on that. So thank you very much. Also wanted to comment some of the STEM courses, the new ideas sound amazing. I think we've asked this before, but we'd just like to understand what kind of supports are or will be made available to students with needs to access these classes moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Julie. I would move on to CPAC. I'm not sure if Jamie or there's a representative from CPAC on the line. Courtney. Oh, Courtney. Okay, good. Thank you again. I'll open it up to questions or comments from the general public. Michelle?
Anne Marie Sadler, you are unmuted and recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Board of Ed. I have been a teacher at DHS in the Social Studies Department.
And could you please speak up just a little? Thank you.
That's the first I think anyone's ever said that to me about my loud voice. Here we go. I have been a teacher at Darien High School for 13 years, and I've worked with exceptionally talented colleagues who are tremendously dedicated to student success. And as a department, we are sort of here, and we wrote a letter with the intention of expressing our concern. And I hope that this unanimously signed letter that we sent to the board underscores how deeply we care about this issue. We believe the proposed staff reduction would create adverse effects or an adverse impact on our student labs and the quality of the lab support we can provide. The current proposal presents the following real challenges. The elimination of the team taught sections will reduce supports offered to students in all levels. It will be particularly effective of students in labs, which are overcrowded now, despite our repeated expressions of concern from us about the challenges of meeting the needs of those students in this model. While yes, reducing team sections will free up FTEs, it drastically increases the need for lab, and we do not feel this has been factored enough. It is not given sufficient weight. We cannot overemphasize the importance of keeping lab sizes small. It was piloted with the idea of 5 students per section. Currently, on average, the freshman, sophomore labs have 7 or 8 students, and some have 10. In a single 40-minute period, a teacher is only able to devote about 5 minutes to each of those students. Often, time does not allow for full support. And in the remote model, it gets worse because labs are only 25 minutes long. So this challenge exists with the team model intact and without the elimination of a teaching position. If team classes are eliminated, the result will be that student services by that model would be need to absorb by the lab model, making the situation more problematic. So the overburdening of lab classes they're already filled beyond recommended capacity, and we want what's best for our students, and what is best is small labs. So we strongly recommend, and we hope that the board considers this. The reduction of the social studies department is not helpful and is not in the best interest of maintaining a high level of support for students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sather. Any other questions?
There are no more raised hands for this RC.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Okay, moving on. We will now move on to RC2 Fitch Academy.
Thank you. And I would like to say thank you to all of you and for the comments about supporting our students, certainly in our team taught and our lab supported models. The generosity of our teachers and the Board of Education supporting our students has impacted our students greatly over these last 4 years with both of these models. So I just wanted to make sure that I noted that. The Fitch RC is really remaining quite the same for next year. Our Fitch Academy is just an extraordinary place. Some highlights for you. Last year, we graduated 8 seniors from Fitch, all accepted to 4-year colleges. We will again graduate 8 seniors this year. We have seen this program grow over the last 4 years, and it is just an extraordinary place for our students who are returning sometimes from a hospitalization, or for whom the large high school is just a very difficult place. And so they have transitioned. Dennis Cabrera has done an outstanding job of transitioning the program from Linda Sorensen, who you know began 4 years ago at the Darien Library. And so they have maintained expectations for learning in this wildly changing environment this year, supporting one another in this very tight-knit community. It is a vibrant, compassionate, and supporting learning environment. And we all appreciate the support of the community for this outstanding program. Thank you.
I will open it up. Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Open it up to board questions and comments. Mrs. Stein?
This is probably directed at Rich. We are in year 4 of a 5-year lease. Usually in the last year of a lease, you're looking to either extend it or find a new home. What is our thinking? Where are we on that?
So that process would probably take place next year. It's a possibility we'll look to see whether or not the existing space has more space to maybe grow the program, or I know Shirley has looked at some additional locations that could be used for Fitch. So that'll really be a process for next year, because next year will be the last year of the lease.
We need more space.
There's a potential that we could.
So we're particularly this year with the space in general, just for social distancing and so on. We were looking at that and we were exploring. There are some adjacent spaces there in that particular facility, and or some other locations that was the case. But they have been very good. They've done a super job for it in terms of hosting that program there. They need to serve a great purpose there. So there are potential space options and extensions there at that location, and we've had some of the discussions. Alan, myself, Dennis, also Rich, and will continue. We'll sort of continue more specific way around that. But we look at the space and see this year to see, can we even service the children in that space because of COVID-related matters.
Right.
That's fine, but it opened up discussions about some of the space that are actually really adjacent to your mining block. I apologize. I don't have to go through all that again. I don't think so.
So so Ellen, are you also looking, if you're looking at larger space, are we thinking about our enrollment, and what would you say in terms of the size of the program now and what you see in the future?
We would have to make and the board would have to make a decision to really, do you want to expand that program, because you cannot expand it any more than the current capacity. It's just, it's relatively at capacity comfortable. It just is.
Could you just refresh everyone with those numbers? The capacity is.
Well, I wouldn't be putting any more, I mean, they're about.
No, but what is the capacity? We agreed to a certain number. There is a number based on that size of that space.
24 students are in the program. Is the max for the program, yes.
It's the max, but we're looking into next budget year now. So I would request just to stay on topic today, that we look at this at a separate meeting.
Yep.
What, Mrs. Dunn, how many students are in the program now?
There are currently 16 in the program. The max for the program is 24. We limited to 16, Mr. Deneen, this year because of the social distancing limitations. But next year, assuming we're back to normal, we will have the ability to hold 24 students there.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that. Any additional board questions or comments? Mr. Maroney.
So in here, we have a line for revenue. Have we had inquiries on other districts? Have we had, we have a line for revenue. Have we had inquiries from other districts to join the Fitch program?
I am unaware of any, we have had discussions, certainly as a superintendent, I have discussions about programs that each district has. I haven't received any inclination or request to do that. And it's my understanding that that was part of the design originally, perhaps. But since we're servicing the number of children we are at the moment, we feel as if we're, at this point, I don't know that we could actually extend that aggressively.
Any additional board? Mrs. Ritchie.
Just on the personnel increase, that's just contractual. We don't see any more FTEs there. That's just basically
It's just a contractual
increase. Thank you.
Good. Any, Mrs. Achman?
Just before we lose Principal Dunn, and it looks like our teachers are still on board, I would request that the high school circle back on some of these issues, because we as a board respond to the superintendent's budget, but we're kind of in an untenable situation hearing from the principal, a unanimous letter from a department, and reacting to our superintendent. So I would request the building level circles up, and as we ask for updates on team teaching, that take place. I know everyone can have different opinions, but it puts the board and the board members in very difficult positions to hear such varying differences of opinions within a building.
Thank you, Mrs. Achman. Any additional board questions or comments? Relative to Fitch Academy, we'll move to RTM F&B.
Fitch.
I'm moving through RTM and everyone else first. Yeah, thanks. Fitch Academy. Any questions from RTM F&B? Jack Davis.
Hi, this is Jack Davis, 197 Hoyt Street. Just keep using that address. I just want to confirm that on 21-301, the transfer that occurred during the course of the year of 25,000 was just reflecting the current staff that was teaching during the year and who you anticipate will be teaching there next year as part of your normal transfers that would have occurred. So we're just looking to confirm that that was the cause of the 25,000.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Move on to RTM Education. Mrs. Santori. Any questions or comments?
I have no questions. I did want to point out our methodology here is that the Education Committee is texting me questions and texting Teresa Voigt questions if they have any. We have no questions on Fitch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to questions or comments from Julie Best, CDSP.
Julie Best, you are unmuted and recognized.
Thanks so much. Real quick, 2 questions. Are we turning any students away from the Fitch program at this point? And also, is there any discussion or thought to adding a middle school aged similar program? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, any questions from CPAC? Courtney Darby?
We have none on this.
Just to reiterate that I think it's important to ask, especially with all the mental health challenges people have been facing over the last year, if there's an increase that will be needed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Darby. Thank you all. Moving along to, sorry. I will open it up to any additional questions or comments from our public.
There are no raised hands at this time.
Good. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your patience as we move through this. We want to hear from everyone. Moving on to RC3, Middlesex Middle School. Good morning, Ms. Summers.
Good morning, and thank you,
Shelley.
everyone. So there are not many changes at the middle school. Our enrollment is projected to.
Mrs. Summers, I'm going to ask you if you could just speak up. We're all.
Fine.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So not many changes at Middlesex next year. Our enrollment is projected to go down 45 students. We thus have enough teachers to adequately present the team model, which is the core of our school. We are, however, losing a library media specialist and receiving a paraprofessional instead, which will put us in line with our DERG A other middle schools, albeit they are a bit smaller. We have not many changes in our other lines, some textbook replacement from the English class, and that is to accommodate the program that we offer. Classroom reference is down, periodicals is up because we have found that the readability level really accommodates all of our students. Resource materials up just a slight bit. Professional development, as in the high school, is down due to travel restrictions. And that's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Summers. I will open it up to comment or questions from the board. Mrs. McCammon.
Shelley, I don't know if you heard, I asked a question of Ellen about libraries and paraprofessionals, and this is probably for you and Alan. But if we are moving away from a library media specialist who was supporting this large tech rollout, do we still have adequate tech support at the library level in the middle school?
Well, we do have tech support. Our media specialists share that responsibility. They do a lot more than tech support, but obviously in the times that we have, that has been a huge thrust. I think we will be able to make do. Hopefully the para that we get is savvy with technology. We have some Chromebooks that are sort of on their last leg. So we're always troubleshooting with students and with parents through this remote time. As you know, at the middle school level, the library folks really serve a larger role in providing guidance to students in their reading selections and in working cooperatively with teachers with the curriculum. So I guess my answer is tentatively yes, that we'll be able to make do with what we have, given that the person who replaces our library media specialist is able to tackle that technology piece.
Any additional board questions or comments? Mrs. Ritchie.
Can we just have the number of building substitutes for MMS? Is that 2?
2.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Ritchie. Any additional board questions or comments? Mrs. Ritchie. Sorry.
This is just on the, I'm gonna bring it over here, sorry. sorry, my eyes are really bad. 310,342 social studies teachers. There was a transfer, and then I see a big jump up for our budget. So is that just reconciling that transfer?
So we have 2 leave replacements this year, and we're assuming those leaves are going to come back next year.
Any additional questions or comments from the Board of Ed? Mr. Adley, Dr. Adley? Alan?
You're fine. Yes, fine. Thank you. I would just point out, yeah, it might be a reasonable thing to say if there's a reduction of 40 students. Is there not an offset there? So that may be something that the parents or community members might be thinking. That's a huge, by any standard, a huge middle school, right? You're committed to the team process up there, and it's extremely difficult in order to actually realize a saving or a reduction or an efficiency. You would have to sort of start to dismantle a team process. It's just not that simple. So that's not something you want to do. It's not something we want to do. When you're talking about, well, logistics, instructional, teaching, social emotional learning, it's just not. But I just want to note that because it would start to change it to like a junior high school scenario. So I'm just making that note.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. Mr. Sini?
Just as a follow-up, Alan, is there a number that tips that? You know, if it's, and I'm talking hypothetically, but if you got to 120 students or something, like, how would you make adjustments if it was a drastic?
Oh, I do think there comes a point where you would perhaps have the discussion, but you're probably a long way away from that.
Okay.
If at all, given the enrollment projections.
Thank you.
Any additional board comments or questions? Okay. Moving on to RTM Jack Davis with respect to Middlesex Middle School.
Jack Davis, 197 Hoyt Street. We have no questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Moving on to RTM Education, Mrs. Santori.
Hi, we have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to CDSP, Julie Best.
Julie Best, you are unmuted.
We have no questions. They've been addressed. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. Moving on to CPAC, Courtney or Jamie? Trisha.
Trisha Cooney, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, this is Trisha. I would like to, I don't see in the budget the unified sports, and so it could be under clubs and councils, but hoping that that will be continued because it was an important program and very popular, and it would be a great feeder program to the DHS unified sports, and in hopes that while other sports began, unified sports did not during the rest of the year. So it would be great if it could get started again in the spring, like the one did at the high school. And also the consideration of a co-taught model to science and social studies, also a feeder up to the high school, because these are tough content classes too, just like math and English. And it would be a good idea to help all students and promote inclusion by doing those as co-taught classes also. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We will add one more group to our list here I want to make sure everyone gets heard. Taylor Carter is representing the Board of Finance. Mrs. Carter, any questions?
Not at this time, but thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I will open it up to any additional public comment around Middlesex Middle School.
There are no raised hands.
Great, thank you all. Moving on, we will move on to the elementary school, RC 05, 07, 08, 09, and 10.
Yes, sir. I believe we have Dr. Forshaw here and the rest of our principals. I think Dr. Forshaw is going to speak on behalf of the principals, but they are all up and ready and being represented by Luke. Luke, are you? I can't see you, but are you there?
I'm here. Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to start off by thanking the Board of Education, thanking our central office colleagues, and certainly all the elementary school teachers, team leaders for helping us put together this budget proposal for this season. I will try to give you a brisk overview of our entire RCs as a combined effort. And so if it's helpful, I direct you to take a look at page 68 of the budget book. This is for folks at home as well, just to have a visual to guide you as I just give an overview here. So from an introduction standpoint, our budget is largely enrollment driven. We operate off the latest enrollment figures provided by the new analysis that's been given to us. So that enrollment picture provides for us the number of sections we're anticipating for next school year. And it also relates to the formulas that drive the allocation of operational resources. So that those numbers are the big driver. Before I get into some detail about those, I want to mention two other important items for the elementary schools this year that you're going to hear more detail about as the day progresses, but it's really important to highlight them from the start, which is our support for the addition of a special education and student support administrator or a second assistant principal for the elementary schools. With that focal point, you're going to hear more about that and the special education RC to come, and we'll be joining back for that conversation later this afternoon. We'll have a more thorough discussion there. You're also going to hear more from our colleagues in the technology department around an allocation increase for a dedicated technology technician for the elementary schools, which we're in big support of as well, particularly given the lessons learned from this year. So those are just two other RCs that are connected to ours, and I'll just use this moment to dive in a little bit around our RC budget requests and any changes. You can see that the personnel increases for the teacher lines are match up simply to the enrollment changes, the projected enrollment changes. And so the table that references each RC increases or decreases is a function of the class size policy and what we're anticipating for next school year. One of the most major shifts in this budget this year is around teacher aides. A major lesson learned for us during the COVID experience was the value of hiring what we've called lunch monitors. The district and the board was very supportive of us acquiring lunch monitors this year, which are individuals that we hire who are specifically assigned to make sure students are safe and secure in following our school expectations during the lunch waves. We've been able to hire for those positions, and it's a 3.5-hour shift for those individuals. And so in addition to providing a consistent person or a team for our lunch waves for all 6 at our elementary schools, what we've also found is that that has now freed us up to use the existing instructional paraprofessionals at each of our schools to do more support for instruction, which has been wonderful. So this year, what we're recommending is, or we're requesting, I should say, is to support the lunch monitors going into the next budget season. You'll see a cost associated with lunch monitors for each of our RCs, and then you'll see a reduction to the instructional paraprofessional line. So the reduction for paraprofessional, the instructional side, is really offset by those lunch monitors. That would allow us to use the instructional paras that we would get through the budget process to focus more squarely on instruction. And I thank the finance department for their analysis. If you flip with me to page, actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump ahead just a moment where we're talking about the instructional aids because it's useful. If you flip with me to page 71, on that page, you'll see that the allocation of instructional aids are still providing for 4 at 4 of the elementary schools and 3 at one of the elementary schools, and that's based on the enrollment and the class size distribution. Just to be clear that the instructional aids are distinct from our campus monitor. So we'd still be requesting a campus monitor position, which technically falls under the instructional aid line, just as a point of clarity. So that's one big shift in our budget request for this school year. Another change in just the way that we're accounting for this school year that we thought would be helpful is if I can direct you back to page 69. We've tried to create a table of the substitute line. We know each year that we have a discussion about substitutes and their use and how do we track. And we are always working closely with our HR department and our operations team. And so this year we now have a table just demonstrating the building substitute. Building substitutes are positions that we hire people for 4 days a week of steady work. They're really integral to our school community. They're a reliable figure for kids and for our faculty. And you can see here on page 69 just the allocation of building subs that we're requesting for each school for the upcoming school year. This is also based on class sections. So again, enrollment driven, formula driven, that we're making these requests. With regards to the operating budget, each year I know that we do get a question around, well, how do you calculate what percentage of the budget in the operating lines should go to which of the lines? And we do this through an analysis of our past year expenditures. We look forward to see what kinds of programs or curriculum or needs there are that have been requested from either our curriculum office or our teachers directly. And we just make adjustments based on the allocation of the per pupil expenditure to those lines. This year, we don't have any significant shifts in the allocations of lines. And again, just to have a visual to support this understanding, if you look at page 70, you'll see each of our elementary schools with a breakdown. If I could direct you to take a peek at the top part, above the top line where it talks about the different texts and the classroom references, you'll see a percentage breakdown. And that's an easy way for us to think about how we shift funds from year to year. There are no significant shifts in how we're funding each of those lines for operating costs this year based on our analysis and based on our student need. And then just again, that last page of 71 just demonstrates again the ratio of elementary school aid allocation and the ratio of how many aides per students this shift in model would allocate for elementary schools. So that said, my colleagues are on the line with me. We try to do this as all RCs at once, but we are well aware that you might have questions about a particular school or responsibility center. So they're all here ready to take questions. I'm ready certainly to take any questions or respond to any comment that you have. And once again, thank you for your support. Thank the community and families for their support this year. We're looking forward for a great next year as well.
Thank you, Dr. Forshaw.
If anyone can hear me, I think the BOE booth is on mute.
Yeah, I'm also not hearing. I'm sorry. I'm also not hearing. I didn't know if this was a slight pause or if it's a technical issue, but I'm not hearing as well.
Thank you.
We are back. We're back.
We're back?
We're back.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, so I'll ask my question again.
Yes, go ahead. Ms.
My question was that why, I would need understanding why Holmes is allocated 3 building subs when the Hindley has the same amount of sections but only has 2 building subs.
So we've looked historically about how many building subs have been in each building. Some, as I mentioned, some principals look for them more aggressively than others and always maintain a full complement.
The additional, Mrs. Stein.
Rich, can you just confirm that the 146,000 savings we're going to realize in the trading of lunch monitors from teacher aid, since you don't, when you look at the budget, it's captured in benefits somewhere
It
else?
is. So the
that-
lunch monitors don't receive benefits because of the hours that they work. So because of that, that's where you're really realizing your savings. So the change between the 5 paras and the 10 lunch monitors is about 146, 147,000.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Achman.
So looking back at the building substitutes, is this the traditional number that's in here or the superintendent's recommended number of building subs?
It's the traditional.
So if we could get an update on the superintendent's recommended number of building subs, that would be great.
Could you just clarify, Ms. Achman, in terms of recommendation?
Yes. So are you recommending that we keep the traditional numbers and that includes one elementary school with 3 building subs? Or is there any addition or reduction around elementary schools that the board should consider?
Okay, okay.
I would ask, are these building subs that are assigned to these specific schools, are they able to move between schools if needed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie.
Just following up on Katie's question on the savings that we're going to achieve with the lunch monitors, is there any way we could get a spreadsheet just showing that? Because I tried, I don't see it captured as a reduction in benefits, but that's probably because there's a lot going on in that number. So can we just have that broken out so that we see that 146,000 that we are saving because of that? That would be great. Thank you.
Mrs. Parent.
It's not necessarily budget related, but I'm really happy to see that we are instituting something that we learned from COVID, but going forward and once this situation is all over, it would be good to have an idea of what else we've learned because of this.
Sarah,
Sorry. All right. I'm glad to see that we've learned something through COVID, and just after this whole thing is over, I would love to see what else we have learned from it, and if there's anything that we could going forward change or what else have we learned from it?
Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie.
So we're seeing a lot of teachers moving around grade levels because of the changes in enrollment. So as I do my math, I see a $155,000 increase there among those line items. So could you, Rich, just walk us through why we're seeing an increase, even though there's only one FTE, I think, that we're getting in there, right?
So it is 3 sections increase. So currently this year we have 103 in enrollment. The projections next year call for 106. So it was an increase of 1 at Hindley, an increase of 1 at Holmes, 2 at Oxford, but then a decrease of 1 at Royal. So typically what we will do is we'll look at the lowest grade and step of the individual teacher who would essentially be bumped out if it's an up or a down in the grade section. And that's why you see the ups and downs.
Can I just follow up on that?
Mrs. Ritchie.
So typically isn't what happened, so I'm specifically referring to Hindley. So typically isn't what happened is that they're using existing personnel in the building to move up and down. They're not hiring new personnel. So I'm just wondering, as we budget that, typically, I mean, this is my experience, the personnel in the building doesn't change. So could you explain why that salary impact would be higher?
Well, there is a net increase in Hindley of 1 FTE in terms of teaching positions, because there is 1 extra class section. Because again, we're not including the COVID sections for next year. So including COVID, we had 110 sections this year, 103 based on enrollment. Next year, we're assuming 106 based on enrollment.
Total, not just one school though.
With
Right,
one
I'm
admin.
really just focused on Hindley and why we're seeing a $155,000 increase there when there's only 1 FTE that we're going to.
Well, you also have contractual increases for the existing teachers throughout the grades.
Okay, thank you.
Rich, can you pull your microphone a little closer to you?
Sure.
I can get you, but barely. Thank you.
I will open it up to, Mr. Maroney.
So a question of something that we were talking about at our previous board meetings is open choice. Is this the point where we would discuss open choice in elementary schools, since the open choice would start in kindergarten?
The open choice would start in kindergarten for the areas that, in the schools that have space in the actual kindergarten class sizes, yes.
So my question is, if we believe that open choice is a model that we want to establish in the district, wouldn't we want every elementary school to be enriched by the open choice model?
Oh,
And
the answer.
so-
Oh, the answer to that is definitively and emphatically yes, right? But there's, I would just recommend first of all, the idea of starting it in kindergarten is sort of a separate discussion, but because the longer the kids are in the system, the greater level of success and ownership and engagement and so on and so forth. Yes, ultimately you would like it, but it's not untypical of districts to start it in a nature of where it does just initially to get into the system, to get into the process where you can actually include it in the actual class size. It could be if you want to increase that by increasing the class size and say, we really feel across the elementary schools we should do that. That's probably, I would laud that. I'm looking at an entry level. At the moment, we don't have the commitment. So I'm saying if we do get the commitment without overscheduling, can we slot the children and students into the kindergarten, and in 3 of the schools we can do that. So that would be the entry level. But I think it would certainly pose, moving forward, how do we strategically and stuff embrace the children, plan for it, strategically do it. And it might well be, Mr. Maroney, that is actually, well, ultimately it is, we would want those experiences to enrich all our children, right? And all our schools. So the answer to that is yes. I'm not so sure, well, since we're not really, I haven't got a confirmation we're even part of the program yet, I wouldn't build it in, but I certainly appreciate that agenda being brought to the table.
I think it makes sense for a further board update on the program, the process to be part of the program, the costs associated or the revenue associated with the program, and kind of the philosophy around what Dr. Adley wants to do.
No, understood. But for me, sorry, if I can just.
Go ahead.
Because I'm just looking at Tokenique and we're at 21.7. So
Dennis,
we're right
closer.
on the verge of going, right on the verge of going into another section. So if we decide to do, or we become partners in the open choice program, then to me, it would make sense to add a teacher to Tokenique to allow Tokenique to be part of that program.
But it's not going to be part of the program this year.
That's a great, if it were to happen and we could actually do it for next year, right? We would just slip it into the schools, the 3 schools that have a wee bit of space. But again, just moving forward, that we would certainly like to expand it to I would think we would like to expand it to all the schools, but just given the current, just where we are at the moment where there's no confirmations, but if we get a late confirmation or confirmations sooner than later, I would like the opportunity to slot the children into those spaces that we currently do have.
Mr. Sini.
So for the record, I'm a big supporter of this idea, but for budgeting process, since we don't even know if we can participate, may I suggest we just go along the lines that it does not yet exist, because it's very difficult, like, to say what ifs and implement things that we might not even be able to participate in. And then if Dr. Adley, you get the okay, that would be an update to wherever we are in the budget process, then we can make some policy discussions or have some policy discussions around it.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mrs. Stein.
I guess to that end, Alan, what is the process to be approved to have the program in our district? Where are we in that process? When do you expect to hear an answer?
So we have reached out to our local RESC organization, and it also has and local superintendents, and it also has to go. Honestly, it has to change at the legislature. I mean, that's where it needs to change for financial. They basically need to donate the finances towards this program to expand it in this area.
So what's your, I'm not holding you to it, but timeline, what would you sort of guess?
It would be a late. It would be a late relative decision to the table. I think by the end of February, start of March, perhaps. No more.
So then to Duke's point, I would ask that this be added to an agenda prior to that time, so we as a board can understand the program and be ready
Sure.
to get on board.
Yeah.
So to that point, is it on a legislative agenda for funding approval and expansion?
Well, that is what we're trying to. That's what we're trying to make sure.
Okay. So conversation to be continued and updates to be provided, but I think everyone is supportive of an incredible program. Mrs. McCammon?
If there are additional items beyond just the financials we've discussed, like if we find that our ELL teacher is at capacity and we might need to talk about that before open choice, would you please also talk about additional or SRBI or something, additional financial impacts that we might need to anticipate, whether they're actually true or not?
Thank you.
Mrs. Ockman?
So this is teeing off of, I think, Mr. Sini's point. Mr. Maroney, my original question was, because the superintendent had said last meeting that we'd be looking to add it at Ox Homes and Hinley. My original question was, are you suggesting an add to Tokenique and kind of making it broader? But I think if we're going to go off of what Mr. Sini said of like, let's wait until we hear more about a program. I'm losing my thought as it was coming, and it was a good one.
I think you're fine.
I guess what I'm saying is I think that we need to make a decision of board, and maybe what it is this update. Because if what we're saying is, and I haven't heard that all board members support it just because we haven't had the discussion, but maybe we need to get more details before any board member could say that. I think everyone I've heard from is very positive. I know I support the idea. I know Mr. Sini just said he did, but I think that kind of conversation has to happen with more information.
Yeah, and again, let me just solidify it. I think, I'm not going to speak for anybody, but we haven't had the board discussion. I think it's important from a policy point that we have that discussion. But as we go forward with today and our budget process, the program does not exist. It hasn't been approved. We don't even know if we have access to it. So by ignoring it right now or just setting it aside, when Dr. Adley has the opportunity to present it, we could either add it to this budget process, or we might have to come with an appropriation at a later date after this budget is passed. Who knows what the timing might be on all this? So that's what I was trying to
originally just
say.
asking clarification on Mr. Maroney's point based on what you said last meeting.
Yeah.
But I agree we need more information.
Yep.
Hopefully not
Thank you.
appropriation.
Any other further questions or comments on Hinley? I'll go through the RCs real quickly so we cover each school individually and then open it up to questions in public. Any board questions or comments on Holmes, RC7? Mrs. Ritchie?
Maybe Marge can touch on this. I go to Sarah's point about the building subs at 3, and I just see that Holmes has just a higher run rate. And I had asked this during last budget season if we had any input or perspective on why that number is higher, and if we could maybe just look into it a little bit closer.
Any other board questions or comments on RC8 Ox Ridge? Any board questions or comments on RC9 Royal? Any board comments or questions on RC10 Tokenique? All right, Michelle, we'll go to any questions or comments from Jack Davis, RTM F&B.
Mr. Davis, you are unmuted and recognized.
Yes, on any of the elementary schools.
Okay, first, I'd like to thank Luke for once again a very good presentation. Number 2, we concur with Mr. Sini and the rest of the board on having the program approved prior to being in the budget. But the last thing actually isn't just on the elementary schools, but on all the RCs where we're seeing FTE changes. I think it would be very helpful if we could start with what the salaries were, what the reductions in staff are, what the increases based upon contract are, and then what the additions are. So we have that comparison to make, as we know that some of this is contractual, but when you're seeing a 6% increase, when you know that the salaries might be only a 2.5% increase, and we ultimately have to explain this to the full RTM, that type of reconciliation would be most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We'll move on to RTM Education. Mrs. Sartori, any questions or comments?
Yes, we have some questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, first one, when you, I guess relating to the open choice program, will you please include the cost and the logistics for transportation when you discuss that program? Next question, for the RCs for all the elementary schools, could you provide a summary budget page for all 5 elementary schools combined? That would be helpful, considering that, you know, we heard a good presentation from Luke, but one of our members would like a summary budget page for all 5 elementary schools combined, if that's possible. The other thing is, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The other thing is, out of the 6% budget increase request, how much is driven by the new? And will this be reversed post?
We're
That's
losing
all.
you, Mrs.
Thank you.
Sartori. Could you just repeat that last question around the 6%? We lost you a little bit. Could you repeat your question that started out with?
Okay.
6%?
Out of
We can't hear.
Yeah.
I think we lost you.
Okay, I'm gonna try. Out of the 6% budget, I tell you what, let's see. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Now you can hear me. Okay.
yes.
Out of the 6% budget increase request, how much is driven by the new lunch aids, and will this be reversed post-COVID?
Thank
That's all.
you. Thank you very much. We'll move on to CDSP. Any questions or comments around the elementary school RCs? Mrs. Best?
Yes, just one, thank you. Wondering if the qualifications for lunch monitors are different from qualifications for a full-time instructional paraprofessional. Basically, does this change reduce instruction and replace it with supervision, and could it negatively impact instructional support for students? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. We'll move on to any questions or comments around the elementary school RCs from CPAC.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, following up on.
Please
Julie-
state your name. Please
Oh,
state
I'm
your
sorry,
name
this
and
is
address.
Jamie Zionic with
Thank
CPAC
you.
in Homesport. I apologize. Following up on Julie's question, will the lunch monitors be providing IEP-driven paraprofessional support during that lunch period? Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to any questions or comments from the Board of Finance, Mrs. Carter, around the elementary RCs.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Two quick questions. I just want to make sure I understand it properly. I don't know if you can do that now, but that the lunch, am I understanding it correctly, that the lunch monitors basically are going to continue to free up our instructional aides to do more instructional work next year, but we can reduce the headcount at the same time? I'm excited about that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding it properly. And then secondly, just to kind of reiterate what you guys have said, if you're going to have a policy discussion about open choice, that's great. If you can prepare some kind of an estimate of costs that are inclusive of, as Clara said, transportation, any additional headcount that's necessary, just so we can kind of get our arms around that, knowing that it could be, announced or adopted at any time. That would be great. Thanks.
Great.
Mr. Deneen, can I just ask Mrs. Carter I was taking notes. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Can she just, Mrs. Carter, could you just repeat your first statement if you have it written down, or question? I just don't want to miss it.
Yeah, I don't have it written down. I was just saying, I want to make sure I understand the teacher aides rejiggering. Like, we're asking for a continued lunch monitoring headcount because it's freeing up our instructional aides. I just want to make sure I understand it properly. It's not that clear to me.
Okay,
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I will open it up to any additional public comment around the elementary school RCs.
Anne O'Connell, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you hear us, Mrs. O'Connell?
Thank you very much. I am a teacher at Henley School. I live at 704 High Ridge Road in Stamford, Connecticut. And of course, my name is Ann O'Connell. I am speaking to the point about paraprofessionals. This year, I was unfortunately unable to have a para assigned to me, and my building administration, try as they might, would send people my way whenever they have the opportunity. I've been working in the district since 1998. And one thing I've noticed in all the years of teaching prior to that and at my tenure here is all children need support during the day. And it doesn't matter what their abilities are. And when I've been working here over the years, less and less para support has been given to classroom teachers. This year, I have none. It has been very challenging, especially during this time of COVID, for me to meet everyone's needs as well as I might if I had an extra set of hands and an extra set of eyes in my room. It's a challenge every day, but it's very important that you know that para-educators are an essential part of the school. They are a trusted adult that children will open up to much sooner than they would for a building sub or a substitute sub for a para that pops in here and there. I can only, I don't know how I can make you understand how essential the paras are to the running of the building every day, being that trusted adult. As teachers during the SRBI process, we are expected to meet with students to support them more time during the week than another student might get. And they are not always qualified for extra support from the reading and math specialists And it's up to the teacher to provide that support, and having another person in the room to help run the classroom while you're working with that child, or give that child an extra shot of instruction themselves, is essential. And from what I understand, lunch monitors will not be able to provide any support for those children. I'm hoping that you rethink that line item and not reduce our paras, because they are essential to all teachers, and importantly, they're essential to your students. The regular ed students who do not qualify for extra services need help throughout the year in certain subjects at certain times, and it's so important they have a trusted adult that's an employee of the building to help them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Connell. Any additional comments or questions from the public?
Username Cat MCG, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kathy McGettigan, and I reside at 20 Bet Marley Road, and I've been with DPS for 26 years. Thank you, everyone, for all your hard work. I would like to address the elementary budget, specifically the proposed reduction of teacher aides, while providing the 2 part-time lunch monitors. So ditto to Ann O'Connell. The budget proposal shows that this would allow more minutes by teacher aides to provide support to students. However, what has happened is that there has already been a significant reduction of time to support students directly because the aides' duties have changed. They've been pulled this way and that way, every which way, all by being good sports and doing what they're told. But those scattered duties, but necessary COVID safety duties, are something that can't be seen on a budget. Because of the restructuring of those aides' duties, the students they've already had a huge loss in their contact with the paraprofessionals. Unless the aides are guaranteed to be back in the classroom with students, reducing the number of aides will be detrimental. They're often overlooked, but honestly, the aides are extremely important pieces of the students' lives. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. McGettigan.
There are no more public comments.
At this point in our agenda, while we're a little behind schedule, we are scheduled for a 10-minute break. In the interest of everyone's time, can we cut that down to a 5-minute break for coffee and a quick visit? So we'll take a 5-minute break and we will return shortly. Thank you very much. that brief break. We appreciate it. We'll keep things moving. We move on to athletics and physical education, RC 11.
Good morning, Mr. Deneen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Mr. Manfredonia. Thank you.
Great. Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Good morning to everybody. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the request of RC 11 and where the highlights would be in this request. There are no new staff requests in this budget. There are also no new large equipment requests. In the past, you had seen the wrestling mats. Last year, 2 years ago, you had seen the ice machine. So there's no new large equipment requests in this budget. I'm going to talk briefly about the uniforms and the 3-year replacement cycle. If the board recalls, back in June, the 2021 uniforms were taken out of, they were on a 3-year cycle, were taken out of that budget. Those uniforms in that 3-year cycle include skiing, boys soccer, home football, boys and girls lacrosse, baseball, softball, rugby, boys basketball, field hockey, and sailing. Subsequent to that decision, the board did put back into the budget using 1920 money the fall and winter sports for purchase for this year, which includes skiing, boys soccer, home football, boys basketball, and field hockey. The spring, as you recall, was not put back and not pre-purchased last June with the consideration that since there was no spring season in 2020, those uniforms could last an additional year. And as a result, you'll see those uniform requests in the 3-year cycle moved into this budget, into 2021-22, which is boys and girls lacrosse, baseball, softball, rugby, and sailing. That's the reason why you see an increase in line item 10-2001 was for those uniforms that should have been in this year's budget moved into next year's budget. I also want to talk to the adjustments we made into the rentals, which also falls under account 10-2001. In an effort to create more equity for those sports that charge a rental fee from the board, which includes boys and girls hockey, skiing, and squash, the recommendation is that the board reallocate the money that it previously has put aside. So there's no increase to the allocations to what the board contributes for those rental sports. But we've reallocated those monies to make it more equitable across those sports in that now the board is going to support 30% of the rental costs associated with those sports, and the parents will support 70% of the rental costs associated with those sports. In the past, if you remember that chart from years past, which I think is now updated in your budget book, those percentages were not consistent. And so the recommendation moving forward is that those percentages become consistent, where the 30% allocation be supported by the Board of Education and 70% be supported by the parents. Those are the two highlights I'd like to point out in this year's budget request for RC 11. I'd be happy to take any questions that the board would have at this time regarding those items or anything else.
Thank you, Mr. Manfredonia. I will open it up to board questions and comments. Mrs. Stein.
Hi, Chris. Good morning. A couple questions. First, can we get a new uniform replacement schedule just to have? Second, on page 85 on your athletic cost per category, could we add, now that we have a defined percentage per sport, the parental contribution next to the fee? And there's also the fee for ice hockey boys and girls on page 85 doesn't line up with what you have on page 86. Could you reconcile that, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Steeney, next question.
My question has to do with, you did have tackle football canceled last year, and I wonder if that changes the replacement cycle for those uniforms. It's a large team, and just wanted to see if there's any roll forward budget impact.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation is we move forward with what the 3-year cycle currently has for tackle football. There's still a hope that we have some kind of tackle football season this March. That's still on the table. There's that in-between season that should, be scheduled to take place end of February into early April. We're still kind of waiting and on hold for the start of the winter season. But the original CIAC request or mandate was that tackle football be moved to a intra-season between the winter and the spring. So my recommendation is that that 3-year cycle for football remains on target.
With the assumption that there's going to be a spring season.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then something that came up earlier, and it has to do with the RC associated with COVID expense. For the first year, we've had to pay a rental fee for the Y facilities associated with swimming. But when I go, and that was the first time the value was defined. So, I guess this is an accounting policy question, and going forward, now that we have a value marked on those facilities, does it make sense to properly account the cost versus revenue, assuming that we have rental income, so we can appropriately, apply a rental fee, if you will, for the sports of swimming, girls and boys. I believe it's diving as well. Did I make myself clear, or do I need?
So it would be a policy change really in terms of whether or not we want to fill the Y. Currently, really like a reciprocal facility use agreement that's in place. We let them rent our gyms for basketball in exchange for using their pool for swimming. If that would change, then we would see an increase in building rental revenue. And then obviously you'd have the expense for that. But that's really, I guess, the question of whether or not we want to go down that route. And if we do, would the Y continue to charge what they did for this year, considering the fees for renting the gyms would be significant?
So along the lines of my previous discussion around policy, separating policy versus budget, could we put that on the list for discussion, please, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mrs. Ockman.
To clarify, I don't know that we actually have that as policy. I think it's been practiced, but I don't think that's board policy. So to Mr. Senior's request, I'm not sure.
Maybe the administration can raise it.
It's probably the third P. It's big policy, small policy, and politics, right?
Yeah.
Accounting policy.
So
But
it's just like as that was has been a long-standing arrangement, I believe. And it's a question of matter of how we want to deal with that. Do we want to go down that avenue, or do you want to try and give it a year of resuming to see what that looks like, or do we actually want to start to look at, well, it's costing, invariably it's costing, well, the board in this case and the budget a little bit more, or a lot more, right? So that's.
I guess this, and again, I don't want to get into this policy
Sure,
because
of course.
it's separate from the budget, but the request comes to account for equal costs among sports. But again, we're going down the road. I don't know how to raise this with the administration and whether or not you guys will come back and tell us you're going to address it, or I just want to raise it as.
I think to your point, COVID has triggered an understanding of what the costs are. They went down the path of charging us. We can understand what the revenue rentals are. If everything goes back to normal, we need to understand that the way it was, but we should update and understand that. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I just would like to echo Mr. Senior. I mean, there are some policy implications baked into this that I think we need to have further discussion on. So,
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Ritchie?
I don't want to belabor the discussion, but I think it's something the full board, after a presentation from the administration, would need to consider before we start talking about whether or not we need a policy related to that.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Mrs. Ockman?
So I think this is the first place in the budget where we're going to start to see the effects of deferrals. Because I will tell you, it took me a little while to wrap my head around these uniforms, and I'm not entirely sure I still understand it, but it's because we cut, we've added, and we've deferred, and based on the cut of last year. So I do think what we're seeing here, and I imagine we're going to get questions about large budget numbers, given this is a 3.99 budget, and this is a lot of money. My understanding, Mr. Manfredoni, is part of this is because we were asked to defer costs last year and needed to make cuts. So some of these uniforms were actually in the uniform replacement cycle. We deferred last year because of an unknown situation. And as we'll see coming forward in other areas of the budget, we are now seeing this large number come forward because it is actually a deferral from a regularly scheduled replacement cycle. Is that correct?
Correct. So last year, in last year's budget cycle, the 3-year uniforms that were included into what is now this year's budget were the following sports: skiing, boys soccer, the home football, boys and girls lacrosse, baseball, softball, rugby, boys basketball, field hockey, and sailing. Those encompass sports across the 3 seasons. Then back in June, there was a reduction by the board for a number of things. And one of the things that the board reduced from the RC11 budget were the new 3-year cycle replacement uniforms. So all those uniforms came out of this year's budget. And then it was decided by the board to use 1920 pre-purchased the following sports for the fall and the winter, which were skiing, boys soccer, the home football, boys basketball, and field hockey. The other sports, the spring sports, were deferred into the 21-22 budget, with, again, the sentiment that 2020 season didn't happen. Those uniforms were never used. We can get another year of use out of those uniforms that were never used.
Okay. So, I mean, I think I know our faithful companions and other boards are watching this, and I'm sure these large, that's a large number to look at in a big budget, but we are looking at the cost of deferrals.
Thank you, Mrs. Ockman. Mrs. Ritchie?
So I also tried to reconcile this, and I went back and looked at minutes and our votes, and what transpired was $89,840 was not in the original proposed budget from the superintendent. The Board of Ed added that back in, and then COVID came and we were faced with cuts. So I think what would be helpful for me, because I'm still trying to reconcile these numbers, and some of them, like lacrosse for boys, looks higher than what we were requested to fund for last year. So I would love to see what we actually purchased with the pre-buy, what was deferred, any incremental increase from what was deferred. For instance, sailing seems like it's been added, but I don't see it on the original ask list. So I would love to just reconcile that, because it helps us defend the budget if we have good information and knowledge. So for me, I would like to understand what was deferred. Now we're asking for additional things. So if there's a way that we can build that into the uniform replacement schedule, that would be extremely helpful to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Mrs. McCammon.
I'm very pleased to see, Mr. Manfredonia, a ratio of 70-30. So we have an understandable way to process what parental contribution looks like. Can you talk to us for a minute about how you came up with that ratio and what it represents?
Yeah, in looking at what we had done in the past, the 70-30 split seemed to be kind of an average of what, if you look at all the rental sports, what the board was contributing versus what the parents were contributing. So that's why we decided to go with the 70-30 distribution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional, Mrs. Ritchie?
Please forgive me if this has transpired and I just missed it in all the madness, but do we have an assistant athletic director at this point? Or so we've hired someone and, okay.
Correct, we do.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Any additional board comments or questions with respect to RC11, physical education? Okay, we will move on to our partners, Jack Davis, RTM.
Wait, before we do
Yep.
that,
Yes.
to follow up on an earlier question, are unified sports at all levels in this RC?
The only
MMS as well?
the only unified sports that are in the RC11 budget is at the high school level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ockman. Okay, Michelle, we will move on to any questions or comments, RTM F&B Jack Davis, with respect to RC11 physical education.
Mr. Davis,
yes,
you're unmuted.
This is Jack Davis. Just a side comment. I did shave this morning, but apparently the host will not allow me to do video.
Thank you.
We'll get you back.
Sorry, Jack, that was John.
Okay, I just want to confirm that I see that swimming and diving are listed as separate sports, even though it's the same team. Is that due to the differences in the facilities they use? And after that, I don't think we have any additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We will move on to RTM education, questions or comments, RC11 physical education. We are looking for Teresa Vogt.
Miss Vogt, you are unmuted.
Hi, Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road. I'm the vice chair of the RTM Education Committee. I have quite a few questions. So first question would be the sports programs at Middlesex that come in at about $42,000. If we could get some color on what that is exactly. Intramurals at the elementary school, is that amount being spread across all 5 elementary schools? Intramurals at the high school at $4,000. Quite a few of us at the high school are trying to figure out what intramurals exist at the high school, so I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Consultant services at $1,000, what is that exactly covering? There is professional development at $2,000. I would like more color on that, particularly given that professional development in the Darien High School RC is at $8,500 for the entire school. $2,000 for just athletics seems rather high. Building on what Mr. Sini said, that is actually a question the RTM Education Committee has been asking for years. Would love to see a breakdown of what our revenue income would be if we were to charge the Y for using our facilities, particularly given that under the traditional agreement, we pay for the custodial fees when the Y uses ours. So it is still a cost to us either way. Let me just see, because I've been getting questions from people. With regard to what parents are paying, the 70-30 breakdown, thank you for that. If we could get a list of what exactly each sport then is charging parents. And I just got another question now. I actually know the answer to this, but I'm just going to throw it out there from one of our newer members. The New Canaan Y, have they always charged us for diving? I do believe the answer to that is yes, but of course, just want to make sure I get all of my committee's questions in here. And hold on, because the texts are coming as I'm speaking. I think, let me look one more time. This is an interesting way of doing things. I think I've got them all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vogt. Thank you. We'll move on to any questions or comments, RC11 physical education, CPAC, Jamie or Courtney.
Jamie Zionik, you are unmuted and recognized.
Yes, Jamie Zanuck, Darien CPAC. Is there still an ongoing discussion about including unified sports at all of the elementary schools? Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Board of Finance. Any questions or comments? RC11 physical education, Mrs. Carter.
None at this time, thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter.
You forgot Julie.
Julie Beth.
Yep. I mixed it up a little, see if anyone's paying attention. CDSP, Julie Best, RC11, any questions or comments? Thank you, Mrs. Best.
Thank you. Briefly, RTM Education, Teresa pretty much covered most of our questions, so thank you very much. And thanks for the 70-30, appreciate that too. Question about unified sports. Did we miss it for Middlesex? Not certain. And I thought some of the elementary schools or all the elementary schools were talking about unified sports, or I thought Ox might have unified sports. Anyway, questions around unified sports, please.
Thank you. I will open up to any public comments or questions with respect to RC11, athletics and physical education.
We have no raised hands at this time.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. We will move on to RC12, facilities maintenance.
Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Lynch.
Morning, Mr. Lynch.
So I'll start with RC12. The majority of the budget requests are either the same or they've been adjusted up and down to reflect actual expected expenses. There are two codes which have large increases. The first one is consultant services, account code 120.01. And this increase reflects the hiring of a firm to revise and update our 5-year plan, which is was last presented in December 2016, and it is due to be updated by the end of 2021. The other large increase is replacement maintenance equipment, account code 730.01. This code was zeroed out last year in the spring in response to the COVID pandemic, and request from that our budgets get lowered. And the items being requested are exactly the same as what we had asked for previously. There's no increase or subtraction. It's the exact same items being asked for again this year. And aside from that, we're just, steady as she goes for the upcoming year. It's been a little bit of an adjustment with COVID, but we've been hanging in there this year. And I think we're doing pretty good now. And I'll take any questions from anybody on the board.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. I will open up to board questions and comments. RC 12, maintenance and facilities, Mrs. Stein.
Good morning, Mr. Lynch. Question for you, or maybe it's more for Alan and Rich. The increase in janitorial 25K and supplies 5K seem to be COVID related. Should they not be in COVID expenses, and why are we seeing them in this budget?
So the contracted custodial services is due to the minimum wage increases that are expected. So that contract that we have is due to be put out to bid. And we are expecting those costs to go up for the following school year.
Okay, because the narrative doesn't match your answer. Sorry, but it says in
The
order
narrative doesn't?
full-time employees required to properly clean the facilities. So I just want to make sure if it's a COVID expense.
No, Mrs. Stein, the increase in the custodial supply cost is due to the fact that the supply prices have increased. Whereas with the reduced number of students in the schools on a daily basis has lowered some of our costs. The COVID related costs are being carried separate.
Okay, I just wanted
to. Next year, we're expecting to be spending our normal amount on, say, floor finish and window cleaner and things like that. And those prices are going up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions, Mrs. Ritchie?
Just to follow up on Ms. Stein's question on the contracted janitorial services. So that $25,000 increase, none of that has to do with COVID. It's
No.
not, okay.
No.
Mrs. Achman?
So, Mr. Lynch, I appreciate you say it's pretty much as always, because I do think you try your best to manage this budget. But on page 92 and 93, what I see is a note that unfortunately always might not be meeting our needs. So I'm wondering what's that part of the narrative saying that we do have needs and that we are anticipating needing more help. And in order to keep our grounds appropriate, we should have more help. What's being asked of the board here? I mean, I appreciate the heads up, but is this, you're going to see it in next budget year? Is this, you really should be considering having more help to maintain our schools this year?
It's just a heads up for this year. I'm not asking the board for anything but to be aware that within the next year, not this budget cycle, but the next one, we'd like to have a more deeper conversation on the subject of additional staffing or other ways to maintain the buildings and grounds.
Okay, I mean, I appreciate that heads up. I just want to know.
Yes, it is in fairness to Mr. Lynch, that it is an ongoing discussion that we've had both last year and this year and will be moving forward.
Okay.
And Mr. Lynch, I'm assuming that as things move forward, looking at the custodial support that's needed at Ox Ridge, we'll continue that dialogue. And is that something that it's an opportunity to look at other options for the janitorial services at that school?
That's correct. Based on the size of the school building, I'm anticipating that when the school opens in February of 2022, there will be a need for one additional person. And then when the rest of the building opens in the following February, there will be another person needed for a total of 5 staff members at that building. The other 4 elementary schools have 3. The current Ox Ridge has 3, but you're going to be going from, 60,000 square feet to 100,000 and, 2 full programs, a pre-K and a K-5.
Right. Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie?
Thank you, Mike. And this is a very lean budget because if you take out your building survey, you're only up, I think, 1.8%. So I just echo Tara's comments that don't hold back if you need something from us. So I know you're good at managing your budget, but we want to hear if you need it. So I thank you. I applaud you for 1.8%. And I think the board needs to have a broader discussion on the building survey and the pros and cons of moving ahead on that.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Mrs. Stein?
Well, and I would add to that, not to forget the deferral of the, where is it? On the replacement maintenance equipment. So if you also take that out, Deb, it's even lower. I did have one quick question on the building condition survey. How are the library portable study and the classroom size study sort of interfacing with this? We've already had some work done. Will that reduce the cost of this study since we do have some legwork already done? How do you see them sort of interfacing?
I don't see that.
The existing building survey was used as part of the basis for the current look at the libraries and undersized classrooms. So that's where they were recognized. The building survey is sort of like a annual physical that you would get. It's a 5-year physical for the buildings. And then you see something that's not right and you act upon it. And so in this case, there's been areas identified. I don't think when this survey is done, there's anything new to add to what was said back in 2016 regarding undersized classrooms or the library. The survey doesn't project where they think you will be. They tell you, here's a snapshot of where you are and what condition the various physical features of your buildings are in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Mrs. Ritchie?
Just curious, I don't know if you know this offhand, Mike, what was the cost of the survey when we did it approximately 5 years ago?
It was about $138,000.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike's promised little or no snow over the season to save dollars on plowing, correct?
That's I'm doing pretty good so far, aren't I?
Any additional board comments or questions around maintenance and facilities? We will move on to any questions or comments about, I get my RCs, RC 12, maintenance and facilities, RTM F&B, Jack Davis. Jack, are you still with us, or anyone else on RTM?
Mr. Davis, you are muted. You can unmute now.
I'm unmuted. Again, I just anticipate a more robust discussion about the 200,000 placeholder on the building study. I understand that costs have increased over the last 5 years, but if we're doing 138 5 years ago, and there's one less school that should be evaluated because it's going to be new, I just am looking forward to that discussion of that 200,000 placeholder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Moving on to RTM education, Mrs. Bode or Mrs. Sartori.
We have no questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to questions from CDSP, Mrs. Best.
We're good right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to questions from CPAC, Mrs. Ionic or Mrs. Darby.
We're all set too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on to questions for Board of Finance, Mrs. Carter.
Mine would actually be as a parent. I can ask that when you get to parents.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I will open it up to any questions or comments around RC12, maintenance of facilities for the general public.
There are no,
I think Mrs. Carter.
Mrs. Carter.
Mrs. Carter?
If I'm the only one. Just because I was using the fields a lot this fall for a youth sports program. Mr. Lynch, do you have enough money for refuse collection as far as it refers to maintaining our fields and keeping them, clean? Because it seemed like there was a lot of trash on the field, and I just want to make sure we're funding you appropriately to take care of that.
Yes, we are getting funded correctly. There was a lot of time this year where the fields at the high school were being used and we didn't have people scheduled because there was nothing going on in the buildings. I think we got a handle on that after the seasons were underway. We realized, hey, we got to get people out there doing the garbage on a daily basis. But at the beginning of like your program and other programs like that, we sort of dropped the ball on having people there while the fields were being used because we weren't using the schools. So we didn't have people scheduled.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. We'll keep an eye on that. It's a good question. Thank you very much. Okay, moving along, we will move to capital projects. Mr. Lynch?
Okay, capital projects were pretty much discussed at the November 24th Board of Education meeting. So I'll just highlight a few things. The only change is we added a priority one item at the high school. We normally go to the schools and ask if they have any large piece of instructional equipment they wish to have included in my capital budget. And so we included the replacement of an Epilog 40-watt laser for the tech ed department at I believe it's $22,000. Yes. So that's the only big difference between the November presentation and today. I wanted to point out that this year's capital budget includes priority one deferrals from last year, which are the carpeting at the high school and the middle school libraries, blacktopping at middle school Hindley and Tokenique, design work for the HVAC, upgrades at home school, and the replacement of truck 42 DAR, which was actually, I deferred it from the 18-19 or the 19-20 capital budget. I deferred it, and then the 20-21 budget, it was deferred due to COVID, and I really have to replace that truck. It's not very reliable anymore. And that's pretty much it on the capital. I don't think you would want me to go through all the items again, would you?
Thank you,
I
Mr.
will.
Lynch. We'll see what the questions come up with. Mr. Rudel, I would ask to the point of, I think, similar questions as we've gone through this. Could we just get and it might be in here, I just might have missed it, a snapshot of the items and the dollars that were deferred, that we're carrying over and playing catch up on? I think the continued clear understanding of what we deferred, yet what we feel we need to catch up on now helps people understand the bigger picture and put the numbers in perspective. Thank you. I will open up to board questions or comments around capital projects. Mrs. Ritchie.
Just to add on that, it would be great to see what we deferred and then what we're seeing at, so we know specifically what the incremental difference is. And then again, I say this all the time, and I want to be sure, and I know we're going to be looking at some significant work to a couple of our buildings, but I'm a big proponent of capital spending and making sure that our buildings are being maintained so that our students are safe and we're increasing the longevity of our buildings. So Mike, don't be shy, don't hold back. If you really think there's something we need, please bring it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. Additional questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Perrin?
Thank you. I echo what Mrs. Ritchie just said about, don't be afraid to ask. Capital, these facilities are a major part of our children's education. I'm just looking at the totals for the next, projected out, and there's a huge increase from this year to next year. And I understand that a lot of that is the home's roof. But is there any way to maybe accelerate something to this year so that we can spread that out a little bit more? Just curious if there's any way to smooth that out.
Thank you, Mrs. Perrin. Mr. Sini?
I'll take the opposite view of spreading things out. I think from a financing standpoint on a capital, we can work with the Board of Finance properly. That it's their role to allocate capital when we need it. So I'm not that worried about the optics, if you will. I think Mike at our November meeting said we can't really hide a large capital investment, or not hide, but adjust for, I guess is the right word. So, and then I'm going to echo Mr. Davis's questions around the consulting services and just get a better idea around that. If there's a way to reduce that, just given some of the facilities work that's ongoing, both from a planning perspective and a construction perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mr. Maroney?
Yeah, so I have two questions, Mike. One is the on homeschool, build new parking lot on the former Curtis property is a level priority 3, but it's into this year's budget. And then my second question is the track at the high school to reapply the structural spray that was done 4 years ago that is now causing problems. Is there any way we can get any remediation from the job that was done 4 years ago if it wasn't done appropriately?
Regarding the track, no, you get a year labor and material, and then a year of material as the warranty. That's it.
Okay.
So that's expired. Regarding the homes, expanded parking lot, it's in this year's budget as a 3. Next year it'll be a 2. The year after it'll be a 1, which should coincide with it'll probably end up getting folded into the library classroom expansion, removal of portables project, just because it'll be economy of scale. But it's just there. It could move to another year. I put it in that year. The dollar amount helps kind of level out the various years of the budget.
Mrs. Achman?
Mr. Lynch, am I correct that on the building condition survey, we'll have to go out with an RFP?
That is correct. And I was thinking while the board members were talking there that maybe a better way to get a handle on what the cost of the building condition survey would be for Mr. Rudel and I to send out an RFP now and just get costs back. Maybe we can adjust that number.
Can we send out an RFP without board approval?
You cannot.
You can send out an RFP, you just can't act an award.
Yeah, so as people are saying, I want the board to have more discussion around such a large number. Sorry, we've moved off capital. I didn't mean to go back.
That changed to an RFI?
Yeah.
I mean, you could solicit quotes.
You can solicit quotes, but that's part of the problem.
We did actually get a quote from when we were originally doing the portable study, who submitted a proposal thinking it was more of a facility study, and that was slightly in excess of $200,000.
Yeah, so that's how we have a $200,000 number.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional board questions or comments around capital? I do agree, we just need to have a further conversation, tie in the good work that the facilities committee is doing around portables and what else needs to be done to these schools and what we would actually get out of an additional building survey that we haven't gotten out of the work that's being done right now. I would rely on Mr. Lynch, who knows these buildings inside and out, as to if that would tell us anything else from a mechanical, HVAC, structural issue. And I think it's something we need to stay on top of, but I'm just not sure at this point in time. We just need to have more of a robust conversation around it. So, but thank you, Mr. Lynch and team, for all that you do. We'll open it up to some.
I'm
yes,
sorry,
Mr.
just tie it, I'd be as blunt as saying, is this something that could be deferred without impacting the facilities.
Yep. No, good point. Thank you, Mr. Sini.
I'm
I will.
sorry, I'm taking
Yes,
notes.
Mrs. Ackman.
Could what be
Is
deferred?
this an expense that could be deferred?
Which expense? I just,
The master survey.
okay, thanks. I just missed which one, because we're on capital now and I brought.
Yes.
it back.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Thank you
Trying
both.
to be accurate.
Thanks. All right, Mr. Lynch, hold on. We'll open it up to additional questions or comments on capital, RTMF and B, Jack Davis.
This is Jack. Okay. This is Jack Davis. I do want to talk about capital in general. The Board of Finance does decide how we're going to pay for things within the town, but there's been a study which will include or change some of the definitions regarding what we can accrue for both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed. And while that hasn't been approved, I think that there needs to be a very robust discussion. So things like the roofs that may be coming up might be bonded and therefore not accrued, but certain other items over $100,000 should be able to be accrued for what might be happening, not this current budget cycle, but the next 2 or 3. And so I think that that conversation with Jen and Jay-Z is a worthwhile discussion prior to your finalizing this budget, because there are going to be some substantial changes on that, or at least I anticipate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We'll move on to RTM Education, Mrs. Vogt or Mrs. Sartori.
Hi, this is Clara. I do have 2 questions. If you look at page 204 to 209, one of our members would like to have the spending for each of the last 3 years. So in your chart here, you have it going forward, but he wants to know if we could get some sort of condensed form that gives us information on does that make sense?
I just see if I can recap. You cut in and out. You're looking for a recap of the capital spending over the last 3 years?
Yeah, and divided, the same way that page 204 to 209 is.
Mr. Rudel, you understand that? Mr. Lynch? Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank
All
you. One more question. Is there any way that the capital projects for 22, 23 could start this year to smooth out the $9 million that's coming down the line? Something like the HVAC at homes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Go ahead, Mrs. Sartori. Anything else?
No, nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to CDSP, Mrs. Best.
We're good right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. Any questions or comments from CPAC?
Just a huge thanks to Mr. Lynch and the facility staff in such a hard year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I echo that and appreciate that. Board of Finance, Mrs. Carter, any questions relative to capital?
I'd love to know a little more about the basement renovation, if we could get some more detail on that.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I will open it up to any additional public comments or questions around capital. Mrs. Ritchie.
I just want to point out, make sure everybody knows that there's additional verbiage in the back that has been provided by Mike. So make sure that you look at that because he'll be answering some of your questions.
Yeah, Mr. Deneen, can
Yes,
I
Mrs.
add to that?
Ackman.
We've seen a couple requests for aggregate spending. So again, I'd like to point everyone to the back of the budget book, your object detail aggregates personnel, aggregates spending in a lot of different ways. So if you're looking at the RC, if you haven't familiarized yourself with the white tabs, I think before tasking the administration with more work, that might actually answer some of people's questions.
So I appreciate that. Good comments. Make sure we all take some time to look at the white tabs, which gives the object detail associated with the RCs. Again, if we still need to answer questions or look at additional information, we're happy to do that. We don't want to create any extra work as we go through this process, but we want to make sure everyone gets the information the way they would like to see it, what gets the information they are requesting. Thank you. With that, we will move on to RC 25, fixed expenses.
Mr. Rudel, you want to do?
Yep, I'll start. Regular transportation does include the one bus that was added for the current fiscal year to service that Renshaw Road, Fitch Avenue area. It does not include any additional buses based on the transportation study for school bus logistics. Our health insurance, we are currently projecting at 7.95%. That does reflect the rate cap that we have with Anthem, who's our current health insurance provider. While it's not finalized, the trend of our health insurance claims has not been favorable, as one would imagine during a health pandemic. Those are really the two large increases. There are an increase in the pension costs. The pension costs are determined by the actuary that is hired by the town. For the year end July 1st, 2020, the pension fund's assets did decline slightly by about 1.5%. That is in part, the markets did drastically decline from March to early summer during the shutdowns of the country. And those asset declines did impact the contribution for the funding ratio for the pension.
Thank you, Mr. Rudel. I will open
Okay,
it up
so
for any. Go ahead, Mr. Lynch.
in my section of RC 25, fuel oil budgeted amount this year is lower than 2 years ago. Our budgeted amount, our actual expenditure was $530,989. Two factors led to that. One was the price of fuel oil has dropped. Per gallon price has dropped considerably. And we've also switched over to natural gas at every location where we could. And so we now run gas at 5 of our 8 school buildings. The buildings that don't run gas, there's no gas main in the street. Electricity, the cost for the actual electric is slightly down. The cost for our demand for the capacity to give us electric when we need it is up a little. And there's also some tariff increases in with the state to raise the rate a little more. So there's a slight increase in electric, the water and sewer bills. It was very hard to get an answer on water from Aquarian. In fact, it was impossible. Nobody would be able to tell me. So we budgeted in a slight increase just to be on the safe side. The sewer rates just went up this November. We don't expect them to go up again. So we used the rate from this November to figure that line item for next year. And that is it for me.
Good. Thank you,
for,
Mr. Lynch.
utilities.
I will open it up to board questions or comments. RC 25 fixed costs, Mrs. Stein.
I'd like to go back to transportation for a second. We sort of spent the time to go ahead and do the transportation study, but I don't really feel like as a board, we came out with a decision on what we're doing with that study. And I'm not sure it should be done in this context or if it should be added to one of our regular meetings to figure out what our opinion is on this as a board, because we had the presentation, we heard some ideas, but we never came to a decision and a full discussion. So I'd like to see more discussion before we decide whether we're adding anything, leaving it as it is.
Thank you, Mrs. Stein. Dr. Abbott?
No, anticipate that on Tuesday evening.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
I second that.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Ackman?
Mr. Karen.
I third that.
Oh,
Sorry.
all right. As part of, well, I guess this is budget decision and it'll dovetail. We've left out 2, but we've added in 1. So I'm not, we've left out 2 suggested by a study, but we've added in the 1 that we did due to building needs last year in that corridor. So
Yes.
So
Well, we just
I
have.
think as a board, we need to come into a decision of what we're adding and what we're subtracting kind of holistically, including the one that is in this budget.
Yes, this one just reflects the revised budget and the decision is yet to be made to, do they want to change that or not?
So the one that was added.
Correct.
For your decision based on emergency and the construction that was going on.
Yes, correct.
Okay, Mr. Sini.
So as it stands now, this is the recommended budget, but we are going to discuss the policy, the decision that might inform us on
Yeah,
Tuesday
I mean,
night.
I think that's a board decision to come to terms with the recommendations, in collaboration with recommendations or thought from administration, but yes.
So you plan to come on Tuesday with a recommendation to the board related to busing? Is that?
Well, I think it's a board, honestly,
Yeah,
it's
and
a
I
board.
forgot to
I'll give input, but it is a
Okay.
collective board decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, question on busing. So if I recall, there was a point that if we could house the buses in Darien, the cost would reduce significantly. And I don't know if this is a discussion for Tuesday or how, but have we ever ventured into looking where we could house buses in town?
So I think what would benefit is if we had a bus depot here, you would see more companies bid right now. So my understanding is the last time it was put out to bid, we had one company, First Student, actually bid on the contract. There aren't a lot of spots to have a bus depot. We haven't explored it thoroughly. Some schools do park their buses and essentially have their depot at the schools, at a given school. So like New Canaan, for example, does that. Some districts like Norwalk, for example, who don't have a bus depot on site, have the municipality enter into a long-term lease agreement with a private vendor to secure better financing. And so then that lease falls within them. And then that helps provide more company and more competitive bids. But that would likely have to be a case for the next time the contract goes out to bid.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mrs. Ackman.
So I guess what I would ask is if we're having this discussion Tuesday, is the board looking to make a decision Tuesday to at least have a conversation? And is there any board member here who needs more information to help them make a decision? Because I think the administration is saying we've provided you with all the information we have, kind of where are you? But to John's question, like, are you coming with a suggestion? No, the administration is not. It's now the 9 of us sifting through. So is there anything else anyone needs so we can have a good conversation Tuesday?
Mr. Sini.
Or is information going to be provided in our board packet?
We have all the information. And then are you providing any additional information?
No, well, I'll resend the.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So I don't want to complicate, and I don't want to get too deep into this discussion, but I also think there's a policy consideration as we work through this, because are we looking to change our policy in terms of who we are busing? Are we changing it to a 1.5 mile radius? So I don't foresee that we'll be able to make a decision on Tuesday about this, because I really do think we need to have policy part of this process.
Thank you, Mrs. Ritchie. I agree.
So
Mrs. Ackman.
sorry. I think then the concern for me as a board member is the board needs to decide on a timeline, because this came up last spring. We decided to do a study. COVID made it all more difficult. We just heard the study in, was it December, November? I can't remember which meeting right now. I've had too much coffee. And we may need a policy, but we also need to decide on a budget. And so by February, we have to have a decision on this, at the very least, of what dollars we're putting in the budget, even if we're saying this is a Band-Aid until we can make it. But time is a little bit of the essence here. So we need to design a process. And that's why I'm asking if there's anything else we need other than maybe a resending of current information. I suggest we tell the administration now so they can have it prepped for Tuesday.
Agreed. Thank you,
Unless
Mrs.
we find
Ackman.
out we need something.
Is there any additional information the board is looking for? Mr. Sini.
I mean, again, we're delving into policy as we discuss budget. I mean, I think you have to discuss it on Tuesday, what comes out, because Ms. Ritchie makes a great point. I mean, we might have to have an overall policy discussion around busing based on our board policy. So I don't, we are under a timeline too, but I think, we should discuss it Tuesday, figure out where we are as a board, what we need, not to come to a conclusion and rush us to make a decision on Tuesday night. If we have to have a special meeting along the way, so be it. And I hate to say that right now, but.
I'm just saying, recognize by
Yeah.
Friday, by February, we have to make a budget.
Understood.
decision one
Yeah,
way or the other,
yeah, yeah.
policy or not.
Understood. Mrs. McCammon.
It was my recollection that there were a few action items or requests out of the last bus discussion. So I just want to make sure that we have those covered in addition to the proposal again.
Well, they'll be included.
Thank you.
Thank you. So to the point of the questions that have been asked, is there any additional information that the board needs from the administration to further that discussion? Mr. Sini.
I guess the big question is, do we have to look at our policy as a
Yes.
board? So we haven't had a policy review. The policy committee
I
has
think
not met.
any, based on the options that were provided in the study.
Yes.
Any decision on those, take out the budget and the dollars, any decision on changing those options is policy related.
Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
comes up, you build from policy, then,
Right.
then the budget associated with that. So
But I think we should have the further conversation, and then we'll have to engage the conversation around policy.
Depending, if
Possibly.
I might
Yeah,
interject,
possibly.
depending on what the outcome Tuesday
Yeah.
is, we do have a policy meeting Wednesday morning.
Okay.
So just,
Good.
let's see how Tuesday night goes, and then the policy committee can, we
Great.
can.
So yes
Thank you,
and no.
Mrs. Stein. Mrs. Ackman?
Because
Right.
the answer is we have a budget in here outside of policy. We have a bus in here that is for a different reason. So
Right.
I guess what I'm asking everyone to do, and I'll do it, like, do your homework or ask your questions so we can start to have a plan to make an action item rather than just kicking this down the road. And I don't mean that anyone's done that purposefully, but now we're under a timeline and it's an expensive timeline. It's at a minimum $175,000. So if there's any questions, let's have a robust discussion. Policy can only take up what the board asks it to. And the board hasn't asked policy to take anything up yet. So know what you're asking us to look at, because as Katie says, and that's, I think, where both of our brains are, Mrs. Stein and I know that we have a meeting Wednesday. What are we looking at?
Correct. Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Mrs. Ritchie?
Pardon me, just to make sure we're all clear, the 176,904 represents the policy that would be a 1.5 mile radius for walking or for busing, I'm sorry.
So if you exempt the students from south of 95 for high school, it would require 2 additional buses. That would be the 176 that's referenced in the budget book. The bus that's in place currently that's servicing that Fitch Avenue Renshaw Road is already built into the budget.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Stein, did you have another question?
No.
Thank you. Okay, we will open it up to questions and comments. We'll go to Mr. Davis, RTM F&B, RC 25 fixed expenses.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that the health insurance was part of the plan that the administration entered into last year, and just curious for how many years we're have signed on for this methodology. And I believe we did hear that our experience rate isn't the best this year under COVID. That's number one. Number two, on the retirement costs, I just want to check that these numbers reflect what Rich has received from the Board of Selectmen for the Board of Ed part for these costs, so that these are the costs that have been confirmed and they're not anticipated to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We'll move on to RTM Education. Teresa Vogt, any questions? Mrs. Sartori?
Hey, Mrs. Clara, the question is regarding the Constellation rate. Is that up for negotiation anytime soon? 0.08 is a staggering rate.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sartori.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move on to CDSP, Mrs. Best.
Quickly, we look forward to more discussion on the bus question, and I'm not being sarcastic. And regarding staff health insurance increases, we did get a question, are the responsibilities being handed from the state to local responsibility? Is that reflected in this number? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. We'll move on to CPAC, Mrs. Ionic or Mrs. Darby.
Nothing from CPAC, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to Board of Finance, Mrs. Carter.
Yeah, along the lines of what Jack brought up, I do remember kind of the staggering increase that we were given for health insurance last year that prompted us to change carriers. And I'm just curious how long that cap will last and if we have any idea what like a real estimate would be if it weren't capped. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. I will open it up to any further public questions or comments around fixed expenses.
There are no raised hands. Oh, Mr. Davis, you still have your hand raised. Do you have any more questions?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
Moving along, we will move on to RC 13 music.
So I'd like to welcome Colleen Thompson. Colleen, if you remember, started during the year and has done a wonderful job in the transition. And this is her first experience at one of our budget processes. Colleen, how you get there?
Hello,
Welcome, Colleen.
thanks for having me. So it's been quite a learning curve this year. First year administrator and getting used to the budget process. Also, COVID has been a pretty major disruption to our music program. We're happy to report that throughout the year, we're still able to do some singing and playing. We're presenting a lot of our music concerts virtually. And the projections or the budget process this year, we didn't, we're not requesting much different than what was requested in the past. And we're proposing the budget based on projected district enrollment and the expectation that participation in performing ensembles will resume fully after COVID restrictions are lifted. So I think the process is that I kind of just go through and highlight any changes and then allow for questions. So if that is the process, that's what I'll do.
Yes, thank you, Colleen.
All right, thank you. So our one of our largest accounts, 230.02 classroom reference. This really represents all of our choral and instrumental music for the ensembles in grades 3 through 12. And I didn't request any increase in that amount for next year. And the next account, 230 textbook consumables, we were able to identify a few periodicals that we were no longer using. So that represented a decrease. The next account, resource materials, 230.04. Our biggest expenditure here is a program called Smart Music that we use for assessment in instrumental music. We anticipated a slight decrease in the need for that program due to a shift in kind of how the middle school is wanting to do their instrumental assessment. So it led to a slight decrease here, but a slight increase in another line that I'll talk about in a moment. Our music teaching supplies, 240.05, a very slight increase, and this is just based on the anticipated needs of mostly our elementary general music teachers. As you know, the elementary general music teachers in pre-K through 5 see all of the students in the district twice per week. So it's often necessary to provide them with some additional teaching supplies. A slight increase in 250.13, which is our accompanists. We hire sometimes in district, sometimes out of district accompanists to play for our concerts. And we identified 2 additional services that we might need at $100 each based on the current personnel we have and plans for choral concerts next year. And account 250.30. This is where there is a slight increase for next year, and that's based on a new program that we started using this year called Soundtrap. It's a cloud-based digital recording and editing program that we use for composition and performance assessment. And we've decided to start using this program at Middlesex and reduce our use of Smart Music for those students. And it was kind of a good thing that we discovered it during COVID, and we needed to do some additional digital sound recording. And so our teachers have identified that Soundtrap is something they want to go with moving forward rather than Smart Music at the middle school level. See if there are any other increases to discuss. Repairs and service contract 720.44. This is our general repair account. Slight increase here, and that's actually the good news is we often get donated instruments that come into the district, and they're often very high quality and require a bit of repair. You might remember, I think, a recent board meeting, we accepted a pretty sizable donation of a string bass, and those instruments new would be several thousand dollars. And by receiving these donations and spending a small amount of money on just repairs and upkeep. It allows us to keep those high quality instruments in the hands of our students. And then finally, I'll skip to the end, our equipment budgets. Account 730.11, replacement music equipment. A slight increase here, just a few needs to, again, we need to keep our instruments in good working order, and a few other items that were identified by the middle school for they need additional music stands. But there's a trade-off there, because in account 1230.11, new music equipment, we decided not to request quite as much as we had in the past. So that represents a bit of a decrease. So I think that kind of takes you through the main points of the budget.
Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I appreciate that. I had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Thompson a couple of weeks ago in Dr. Adley's office, and the energy and excitement you bring to the program in these challenging times is to be applauded. And thank you for carrying on. It's always been an exciting program that the community just loves. So thank you for being here and moving us forward. And I like to hear something good came out of COVID in terms of the Sound Trap program. So I will open it up for board questions and comments.
Thank you.
Ms. Ritchie.
First of all, thank you and welcome. And thank you so much for continuing to bring music into the lives of our children, because it is so critically important, especially right now. And I don't have a question. I do have a comment. And I just looked at your budget that you actually had going into this current fiscal year and compared it to what you're asking for the next fiscal year. And really, your overall ask is less than 2%. So I applaud you for that. And I'm sorry that we couldn't continue all the programs as we usually do. And I'm hopeful that next year we will be back to where we usually are. So thank you.
Well said.
Thank you.
Chief. Any additional board comments or questions? All right, we'll open it up. Any additional questions or comments? RC 13 Music, RTM F&B, Jack Davis.
We have one question from a member. We'd like a little bit more explanation in the clubs and councils that's been averaging about 40,000 over prior years, and yet was budgeted for 56 for the current year and 58, 59 for the next fiscal year. That's 101,003. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to RTM Education, Mrs. Vogt, Mrs. Sartori.
Yes, a similar question relating to clubs and councils. Please explain the increase, and also could you be more specific about what are the clubs and councils in the music department? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sartori. Moving on to CDSP, Mrs. Best.
No questions, but welcome and thank you. Every little bit of program that's been shared with parents this year, I know have been greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. Moving on to CPAC, Mrs. Zionic, Mrs. Darby.
Hi, Jamie Zanuck. I'm aware of adaptive music for ELP. I'm curious if our music teachers are receiving professional development and in differentiating instruction for all of our learners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Zionic. Moving on to Board of Finance, Mrs. Carter.
No questions at this time, thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I will open it up to any general public comments or questions around RC 13 music.
There are no raised hands at this time.
Thank you, Michelle. Moving along, we will move on to a review of RC 14 art.
So it's Ms. Samus, Jackie should be on the line. You there, Jackie?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Oh, there you are. Good morning.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time and work that goes into putting this budget together for our schools. Our budget is very similar to previous years, and we have found that this meets our needs. We've tried to efficiently use our art supplies, and we try to continue to do that. We saw a small increase of students this year electing to take art at the high school, and we hope to see that continue next year. One change for next year is adding a membership at each building level to a resource called the Art of Education. This is a digital resource for teachers, providing hundreds of hours of PD and lesson resources for teachers, and is especially important for teachers at the elementary level who teach 6 different grade levels. This resource is similar to the Quaver program that the music department uses. Additionally, we need to continue to have the kilns rewired at the high school, and it's time to have the front loader number 2 rewired to fire to the correct temp. And we need to replace our kiln shelves. At DHS, 50% of our art classes are clay-based, so keeping the shelves and the kilns running at their optimal temps is important. And that's all I have for major changes from last year.
Thank you,
Any
Mrs.
questions?
Bemet, and thank you again. Another incredible program. I need more shelves in my home for the clay and the artwork that comes. But thank you very much. We'll open it up to board questions and comments. Mrs. Ritchie.
Thank you so much, and thank you for continuing to bring art into our children's lives in these difficult times. Just like music, it's so important to have these things, and it's very helpful for our social and emotional well-being. My question is about the computer software and supplies and the addition. Is that, could you just explain, is that a recurring cost that we will see come up annually or every couple of years?
Yes, so this is getting us one membership at each building currently, and then I would like to see over the kind of the next 5 years adding it so that each teacher has their own membership to this resource. So it will be something that will be recurring every year. And with an increase, I think I left my notes at school. I wasn't anticipating this being fully digital, but I think the max for the 14 memberships is something like $9,000. So the cap where we're starting right now at around 4,300 will then the max in 5 years be 9,000.
I'm sorry, so we're going to see that 4,500 carry over each year. That's an annual expense.
An increase.
And then it'll
Correct.
gradually increase.
Correct, and with an increase.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from the board? Mrs. McCann.
I just was looking for a little more clarification, Jackie, on when you say it provides the same line item as Deb was referring to, when it provides additional professional development. What is the need, and can you talk about what it is providing? And specifically, I'd like to know if it can support teachers who may have to work with students who may not be able to access art in traditional ways.
Yes, so it is it's a web-based program that has hundreds of hours of videos that are produced by art teachers that are constantly evolving and constantly changing. So it's not a static resource in that sense. The Art of Education is a company that has hired art teachers from across the country to develop lessons, to develop videos and resources for classroom teachers. So if you have an interest, say, in social emotional learning and art, you can kind of filter the searches and get to lessons that are based solely around social emotional learning and art. Or if you're looking to just study portraiture, you can then filter the lessons so you're getting that. It's searchable by grade ranges and also by abilities. So it will just provide teachers with kind of a starting place, sometimes to look for resources for great videos or material worksheets, handouts, things that would just speed up their process and their prep time. Additionally, the PD piece of it, I think, is really important. My teachers are very excited about this because kind of on their own time or during our PD days, you can tailor specific art-directed professional development around topics that interest you or that interest us as a group, that we'd want to watch videos made by art teachers specifically about how it works in the art classroom.
Thank you very much.
So
Go ahead, Mrs. McGann.
the last piece of that, Jackie, was whether or not, and thank you for the answer, was whether or not there is PD that's also accessible for teachers who may encounter a student who cannot access art in traditional ways. So for example, it's portraiture, but a child can't draw.
I do not, off the top of my head, know. I couldn't answer that question accurately. I can come back to you with a specific answer at a later date, but I don't have that information currently.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any additional board questions or comments around art? Thank you.
I just want to,
Dr. Abbey.
I just want to recognize Jackie, who's an example of all the RCs who do a great job of sort of managing the accounts as best as possible. And this small increment to go towards building the capital of the staff is just something over time we'll continue to see sort of just continue to invest in that area. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you,
Jackie.
Dr. Adley. We'll open it up to questions. RTM F&B, Jack Davis, RC14 Art.
Thank you. It sounds very encouraging with the new software. I'm just curious whether or not over time we would see, based upon these new lessons and some of the things that were just mentioned, whether or not there might be changes to the art teaching supplies, either greater or less, depending upon what's there. And just not an answer now, but sometime in the future, understand how that might impact that number as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Moving on to RTM Education, Mrs. Sartori, Mrs. Vogt.
One question, I'm sorry if I missed this, but at the top of page 103, elementary art system-wide, that whole line is blank. I know the art teachers are listed with each elementary school, but is there any other personnel associated with elementary art system-wide that should be in this line?
Thank you, Mrs. Sartori. Moving on to CDSP, Mrs. Best.
It's Lori Olson. We
Looks
have
like
no
she got
questions
knocked
right
out
now.
and is waiting to get. Oh, Lord.
I'm letting her in right now.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Julie Best, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, sorry, I was having technical difficulties. We do not have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. Moving on to CPAC, Mrs. Zionic, Mrs. Courtney.
Yes, Jamie Zionic. We don't have additional questions. Jill asked the question about the differentiating instruction and what sort of professional development is happening, and that was our question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Moving on to Board of Finance, Mrs. Carter.
No questions at this time. Thanks.
Mrs. Sartori, I just want to make sure we captured your one question, did we? Relative to staffing specific to the art RC?
Blank line item.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe my page is a mistake, but the whole elementary art personnel is blank on my page. So I don't know if that's unique to me or whether there's a reason for that.
Yep, we've got that question. Thank you. Thank you all very much. We'll open it up to any public comment or questions around RC 14 art.
There are no raised hands at this time.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll move on to RC 21, Library and Media.
I think Dr. McGettigan is on the line. She may have a media specialist with us, or she may not.
I am Dr. Adley. Good morning to all, and thank you to all involved for all your hard work in this process. And thank you to the Board of Education for your support. I am going to turn the first part of this discussion over to Nicole, who is going to speak to some budget specifics.
Good afternoon or late morning. My name is Nicole Schwenier-Croker, and I am the librarian at Tokenique Elementary School. Our proposed budget for the 21-22 school year was actually assembled by all the librarians across the district. It can be found on pages 133 and 134. Our goal was to develop a total budget that had a zero increase from last year. So we looked at each one of our budget lines. We evaluated which components of the program which required updates, which needed to be maintained, and there are also some that are no longer relevant. So you will notice on some of those budget lines that they have dropped down to zero or they have decreased in amounts. I hope you know that the Board of Education's continued financial support for our program, our facilities, and our staff does benefit our children K through 12. Whether we're in person or remote learning, which our role has changed drastically and has brought us to the forefront with our remote learning as well. And by supporting the making and creating philosophy, which is built into account 23004 resource materials, I developed a collaborative project that won the 2020 Follett Creativity Award from the Connecticut Association from School Libraries. And I mention this because I think this award shines a light on Darien Public Schools. It shines a light on our students, our staff, and also the message that you provide that libraries are truly essential. So with your continued support, our libraries now support the one-to-one tech initiative. And with that initiative, our librarians have found that our responsibilities have also changed and our time has increased to support our students and staff. So the biggest increase you're going to see is going to be in budget line 123,008 for new computer equipment. We are looking for ways to use our time more efficiently, and we have requested a printer in each one of our libraries. And that is truly the area that has the only increase for our entire budget. So we thank you for your support for the Continuing with Libraries Reimagined. And I'd be happy to answer any questions at the elementary level. And Dr. McGannigan will be fielding questions for the secondary level.
All right, I will open it up to board questions and comments. Mr. Sini.
Just on line 23001, accession.
Yes.
We're running about 27,000 year to date, well below budget. And then it seems like there's a significant reduction in the budget we're reviewing right now. Maybe if you could provide a little color on what's going on given COVID and some of the
Sure. So our accessions budget has, when we went into full remote last year, I will tell you that we redirected our resources to purchasing ebooks for students to use for pleasure reading and also to support the language arts curriculum for their genre related studies. The decrease that you see in the budget was done at the finance department.
And then make, is there something this year that's occurring that's causing the reduction? Is this COVID related to? I'm just trying to get a, run
Sure,
rate.
I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know if someone else can.
So there were reductions done for library across the board.
So we did do a comparison to our DIRG, our peers. We asked each business manager throughout the DIRG in terms of what are their library operating expenses, not necessarily their personnel, but their operating expenses. We are at the top of that DIRG, and so that reduction kind of brings us down a little bit lower.
Okay, so that's for next year. And then this year, is there any COVID related that caused us to only spend, we're halfway through the year and I'm just trying to get to a run rate.
Okay. So to explain how libraries spend our budget. So the accession budget is for our book purchases. And those are purchased throughout the year so that we can maintain an updated collection that responds to student needs, staff needs, and any changes. We have noted across the district for libraries that the ordering process is much slower this year. So our orders are going out and they're not being invoiced right away because we can't invoice until we actually have the products in our library. So we spend that budget throughout the year. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I probably didn't verbalize it well either.
No problems.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much. I just would like to reserve, I may have a question on this when we get to RC 15. I'm just trying to understand from a policy and budget perspective how the library and technology are playing. So if I go back to this topic a little bit on there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Ritchie?
Just back to that expense item that we were talking about. So our budget and estimated is still 93,800. So Rich, you would expect that we would probably spend all of that since we still have it as estimated.
So one of the things that Nicole mentioned is the turnaround from warehouses is a lot slower. Even for example, when you buy things from Amazon, you're not getting them in 2 days. We don't pay anything without an invoice. And so there are orders that are out there, but not necessarily expense, which is why you're seeing that rate a little bit lower.
Any further board questions or comments?
Yes.
I'll open it up to, I'm sorry,
Okay.
Mrs. McCammon.
Thank you. Hi, Nicole.
Hello.
I would love to understand from your perspective, the impact of moving, you talked a little bit about it, but the impact of moving to more ebooks. Can you talk a little bit in more detail than you have already about how that's changing libraries and how it's changing students and what it looks like financially? My understanding is that financially, from a pricing standpoint, ebooks and paper books are a little different.
Yes.
In that you have to renew ebooks, although you don't have the cost of, so could you talk about that, please?
Absolutely. So the cost of ebooks is established by the publishing companies. And most of the time, books that we would say you read for pleasure, fiction books, nonfiction books, and books that we purchase through our company is called Overdrive. They house their own library collection for us. They all have different pricing depending on the book. So majority of the time you are purchasing one electronic copy of the book and the publishing company establishes the borrowing rights. Most of the time that is a one-to-one borrower, so you're borrowing one ebook. Sometimes you have it for the life of the book. Sometimes you have it for a limited period of time. For instance, the Harry Potter books, which are widely popular and the most circulated audio and ebooks that I house in my collection. I purchase that copy and I have it for 5 years. At the end of those 5 years, I have to decide whether or not to repurchase. Ebooks that I purchase mostly from publishing companies that are geared towards supporting instruction in the classroom very often are what we call multi-user copies. And so the cost of that one might be higher, but that's because any student and any number of students can access that all at the same time. So many of those decisions are not necessarily made by myself, but we are at the mercy of the publishing company because it's copyrighted, just like a print book.
Any additional board questions or comments? Mr. Maroney.
Just a question. In the narrative, it mentions account 123008, but in our spreadsheet, it's 123009 for new computer equipment.
It should be 9.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. I will open it up to any questions, RC21 Library, RTM F&B Jack Davis.
We have no questions at this time. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. RTM Education, Mrs. Sartori, Mrs. Vogt.
Do you have this question, Teresa? Okay, I'll ask the question. It appears that the library budget for us is 152,000 and the average of our peers is 80. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mrs. Sartori. Any additional questions?
No additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you. CDSP, Mrs. Best.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. CPAC, Mrs. Zionic, Mrs. Darby.
Jamie Zanuck, thank you. My question is, are the librarians working with our assistive technology department to make sure that there aren't redundancies in resources, that these resources are accessible to all students when possible? Thank you.
Thank you. Board of Finance, Mrs. Carter.
No questions at this time, thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. McGettigan, do you have additional conversation around RC21 Library?
I do not. Again, thank you to the board for all your support. We truly appreciate it.
I will open it up for any further public comment or questions around RC21 Library.
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure I realize we are actually a little ahead of schedule by 5 minutes. So at this point in the agenda, we are at a lunch break for 45 minutes. I would make the recommendation if we could agree to 30 minutes and to keep the program moving. If we're all,
Next presenter,
Well,
be
we need
ready,
to-
because that's the hard thing for the next presenter.
oh,
Marge, can you, or somebody, make sure.
Yeah.
everybody's ready.
Yeah, it
I'm
changes
sure that
everything.
can happen.
Alicia's always ready. Right, we'll try.
Are we good with that?
We'll try and
We are.
we'll try and make an adjustment for people. Okay?
Okay, good.
So
All
we
right.
reconvene at 12:30.
We will reconvene at 12:30.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone on the line.